for showing up and welcome back. We are very, very excited about starting the process again. And I know it's been a bit of a challenge with, COVID and not being in person and doing this virtually. And I think we've done a really fantastic job the last few meetings. And so we're excited to get started again and really just take those next steps and develop a long-range facility plan for Silver Falls School District. I think we'll go ahead and just kind of give a real quick update on the agenda here. And then after we do that, I'd like to kick it over to Scott and just have him say a few words. But kind of for what we're planning on today, we're meeting a little bit earlier, and I think that's good. If we take up the whole 3 hours, that's great. If we get out early because we've done just fantastic work and we've all gotten consensus and we're all excited, that's great too. So just having that flexibility between the 2 and 3 hours is really good. So like I said, we're happy to be back and really excited. We'll visit really quick where we've been in the long-range facility planning process, and many of you have already are fully aware of that, and it'll be a little redundant, but I think it's important just to remind us, because it has been several months, and obviously we've had a lot of events that have happened, and particularly in your community, that have really taken the primary focus, understandably. So, but we want to kind of revisit some of that. We'll look at a revised schedule of the long-range facility plan moving forward and have some key dates that we'd like everybody to target. We'll also talk about, we gave us a short synopsis of our matrix in the educational adequacy of where we were the last time we met, but it was really just kind of numbers at that point. What we'd like to do is get a little bit more in depth with what we've learned thus far. And we're really taking an approach because of the amount of schools that you do have. We want to subdivide it and do essentially half of them today, and we'll do half the next time. So if you don't see your school today, it's not because we forgot about you. It's just because we're going to do it next time. So and as we go through those progress reports, we will stop at each school just to kind of get some thoughts and feedback and observations. And what are some things that maybe have been missed, and what are some things that you really like to emphasize? And then the second part of our meeting tonight will really explore Silverton Middle School site. If you remember, in our third meeting, we toured through the school. We kind of looked at the site, and if you remember, we did that emoji exercise, kind of just to get people to start thinking about what they really liked about the site, what could use some improvements, what are some challenges. So we're going to revisit a little bit of that, but put a little bit more meat on that bone, and then just wrap it up with some general observations, and go from there. So you all probably saw a little bit more detailed agenda that was sent out. So that's pretty much what we're gonna cover here. And not to put you on the spot, Scott, but if you want to say a couple words, that'd be great.
Well, thanks everyone it's so great to put faces with names. We really tried to do this in person before the freeze and before the COVID numbers got out of control. And so, the virtual thing for me is such a struggle. I feed off of interactions with others in person, but I'm really happy to be here. And, the past 4 months being here in Silver Falls has just been incredible. And every time I'm asked, what's the main reason that made you come all the way down here? And I always say it starts with the people, and I can't wait to work with you. And I will put my cell phone number in the chat for you, just so you have it. Just like I have for all 500 of our employees. You call or text anytime you have an idea that you like to share or check in. And I really mean that too. And I really hope to meet you all soon in person. And I'm looking forward to the work. I think this is the most important work going forward. for the school district of Silver Falls as a system, because this will affect generations of our kids in the entire 250 square mile district. And so it's an honor for me to be a part of it. And this is kind of a restart. We have the pandemic, and then we had these horrible wildfires, and everything got put on hold. And so now's the time to kind of take a step back and see where we've been and where we're starting from. And so I'm happy that I'm here at this time. So again, thanks for having me, and I look forward to working with you.
Great. Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate that and framing that conversation. I guess I probably should have asked everybody. You can see my screen, right? Before I keep moving on. All right. So to Scott's point, where have we been in the process? Again, as many of you already know, we've done some pretty good work up to this point. I think probably the best way to revisit that a little bit is to look at the schedule and really kind of talk about some of those key milestones during our initial meetings. We met initially in March with the kind of piggybacking on the process that had already started. There was 2 meetings before we had started, and we really just wanted to introduce ourselves and who are these people and why are they here. But really kind of we revisited the guiding principles that had been developed at that time before we'd come on board. And we reviewed a lot of the work that the district had done before that point, everything from the PSU enrollment study to some of the polling that had been done to even a little bit of the facility assessments that had been done before we came on board. All of that really, really important, vital work that's foundational to where we go in this process. And then we got to take a really great tour through Silverton Middle School. And it was a little dark out, and there wasn't very many lights on inside. And but it was pretty exciting little tour, and it really gave us kind of insight into some of the challenges on that site specifically. And so that was good. We wrapped that up with kind of that emoji exercise, and we got a couple of images we'll share with you later in this presentation that kind of encapsulates some of those thoughts, so we can remember what we talked about. When we came back, and remember, this was that time period, we met first in March in person, which was great, which is just like Scott, what we prefer to do. We like more hands-on interaction and doing more small group exercises. But, we had to really recalibrate and really kind of think about how can we do this virtually. We came back 2 months later in May and had a really great bond history lesson by Wally that was presented to talk about, Silver Falls School District and the bond history, both pre-unification and post-unification, and some of the successes that have been had, and some of the failures, and some observations related to some of those successes and failures. When we came back the next month, we got a little bit of our groove working virtually, but we looked at some learning discussions as it relates to kind of more forward thinking, contemporary learning environments. And, I've heard some, questions related to, well, what does contemporary mean? Does that mean kind of in the here and now? And, we like to think of it as more like future proofing, and to the best of our ability with what we know about educational planning and design and pedagogy at this point, how can we kind of look and forecast out and create flexible learning environments? And some of those spaces that we had shared at that time were really obviously they were all pre-pandemic. And what was really interesting, this is more of an anecdote than anything, what was really interesting about that is some of those spaces have students at full capacity right now because of the flexibility, the agility, and the adaptability of those spaces. And really some of the challenges they've had are more related to just personnel, obviously, because you can only have so many students in one classroom. But from a capacity standpoint, we've been able to to accomplish that in some of those schools. Um, so that, you know, that's kind of a real quick description of what do we mean by contemporary, but it's really just thinking about the future and what it may hold. We looked at enrollment projections and kind of compared them based on you know, what PSU had put out in, I think it was 2018. One of the takeaways that we had at that time was, well, what is the city of Silverton doing, you know, as it relates to growth and getting a better handle on that? So we've since reached out to Jason with the city and just kind of getting an understanding of their growth plan. And that's something that we'll be diving into deeper, not at this meeting, but at a later meeting. Um, but it's really good foundational information, again, as we think about capacity and utilization at each individual site and how do we plan for the future. We didn't really quite get to the equity discussion. I think that's something that we'll want to have at some point, and that'll probably happen after we have all of our educational adequacy assessments done. And at that point, we can really kind of look at it all together. We have some sense of it from just the facility side, based on the facility analysis, but we really need to look at it from the educational side and then have that discussion. How much, you know, do we want parity and equity between schools? You know, how important is that to the district? We'll want to get a pretty good understanding of that. Which brings us really to today. In between that fifth meeting and today, we've since visited the sites, the K-8s, and obviously the middle school. We've been there and have just taken a kind of a look around. We're starting to do some as-built information of the floor plans, just to, again, get a good sense of existing square footage and what those spaces are being used for, so we can have a better handle of that. We also have compiled the educational adequacy assessments that we've done thus far. So still a lot of work to do, and this is a perfect time to reconvene and come back and talk about some of the things that we discussed a little bit earlier. Richard, did you want to kind of piggyback and talk about the schedule moving forward a little bit?
There you go. Much better, much better. Okay. Good evening. My name is Richard Higgins. I am a colleague of Jonah Jensen, and we have another colleague, Angela Crooks, on the line as well. So I'll give you a kind of a brief introduction of why we're drilling into this schedule. And Jonah referenced it earlier, talking about how we really want to understand what makes Silver Falls School District. We really did, the site visits were really helpful then. We really understand, albeit, you know, the school wasn't in session, we understand the K-8 communities and how valuable and important they are to the communities and the school district. I got to spend some time with Lauren, got to know a lot more about some of the challenges of what's going on in the district from the facility side. But also Lauren gave me great insight into some of the successes and how some of these schools had really been mobilized to take things upon themselves and did a great job. And through all of that, we learned about the strength of your K-8 programs and the communities they serve. So that's what we really want to do. We want to understand the school district as a group, as a whole, so that we can serve you in creating a long-range facility plan. So a long-range facility plan is a requirement of the state of Oregon. ODE has put out a beautiful kind of organizational chart and a list of requirements. So our task, one of our tasks, is to go ahead and help you fulfill all those obligations. They all are really targeted on completing a comprehensive long-range facility plan. So we're going to take you through that, but it's not just checking the boxes. It's really important that we fulfill your needs, like we talked about, why we want to know your needs so we can fulfill your needs as a community in developing a long-range facility plan. So Jonah described what we've done to date. I'd like to push this forward to what we're going to do from here on out. On this schedule, it kind of shows that we've got 3 more meetings. The agendas always are going to focus on updating you on some of the work that we've done. We're looking forward to doing educational adequacy with the remaining schools. You're going to see tonight the kind of information that we're collecting that we think is very, very valuable to us to understand, but also I think it's really important for you as a committee to hear it from all of the schools individually. So we're going to complete that at the next meeting in December. We're going to continue to do some development of what we work on tonight. And then with that, and then we're going to do that middle school exploration. We're going to share this information with the city. Again, that's a requirement of the Oregon Department of Education to make sure that all the city entities are all at least communicating and knowing what each other is doing, like Jonah referred to earlier. What is the plan development for the city of Silverton? So that's a communication piece. What about Parks and Rec, a number of other quasi-public groups? Then we're going to help you develop a budget for all of this potential work. ODE provides a facilities assessment tool that can tell you what those costs are supposed to be, but it only has 250 entries. It can't get down into the detail of every single school, and it's an assessment tool. It's not really designed to kind of formalize an approach. So we're going to help you craft that long-range facility plan and developing options for this committee to consider. We are going to, that's where the budgeting piece for us comes into play, and that we have a budgeting tool that can help whatever we talk about, whatever you want us to calculate for budgeting. It's budgeting, it's not cost estimating. We can craft it into a formula that you can understand. What we're going toward is creating a plan that this committee can support. This committee will understand it. This committee will understand where the budgets came from. This committee will understand why those decisions were made, and we create a draft for you. The goal is, again, is to share it with the school board as a draft recommendation. It's also to share it with the city based on what we've learned. It's a draft recommendation. Probably will need some refinement. That's our experience. And so we will refine it over the next 3 months with the goal, it's a goal, of being able to submit something to the school board for approval in April of next year. That gives the school district plenty of time to fulfill their obligations, get approved by ODE, and qualify for the Oregon School Improvement Match Grant, the awesome grant. I love the acronym. But down at the bottom, I didn't forget it. I was just kind of saying that's to be determined. Once this committee feels like we're ready to move forward and share it with a broader community, then we will help schedule and organize and locate those community information meetings. So that's a packed agenda for the next 6 months of really good work. So we're encouraging you to schedule these meetings, put them on your date. We've got them right here. November 18th is tonight. Next one is December 16, which is also Wednesday night. January 20, a Wednesday night, and then February 17. You'll get notifications, but if you've got your Outlook open, put those dates in there. So that's what we've got for the schedule right now. We did move it back. For those of you who met with us a few months ago, we did shift it because of the little delay in process, but we've now created a recovery schedule, and we think this really somehow I hit my mute button. But I was done.
Perfect. Thanks, Richard.
I think I hit my keyboard and that put me on mute.
I just got so excited.
Oh, yes.
Great. Before we move on, any questions on that? I know that's a lot of information again, and I know we've seen variations of this before, but any overarching questions? Yeah, Ray.
In addition to, quote, checking the boxes to satisfy ODE, did the board add some additional big picture requirements to the charge way back when this committee was formed?
So out of the process that great question. Our goal is not to check the boxes our goal is to check the boxes so that you qualify for the funding. We are dedicated to trying to help this committee craft a comprehensive plan. And that goes well beyond the boxes in the ODE outline.
Well, that was, my question was, did the Silver Falls School Board, I don't know what the boxes to be checked, I don't know what the question is, but did the local school board also impose some questions that this committee needs to answer?
I don't believe, well, Jonah, maybe you and Angela can answer that better. I'm not familiar with it off the top of my head.
Richard, Jonah, I can speak to that. I'm on the school board. And no, we didn't, Ray. We just tasked the superintendent at the time to start this process as he saw fit.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ray.
Thank you, Tom.
Great. So I won't go into a lot of detail here because we've seen this before, and Richard did such a great job of describing this, the process here, but this gives just a brief synopsis of where we are with the educational adequacy. We do have some educational adequacy done at Scotts Mills, Robert Frost, Butte Creek, Victor Point, Mark Twain, Silverton Middle, and Silverton High School. We will be talking about all of those with the exception of Silverton High School. We'll group that into the next meeting at that time. And you can see here what remains to be scheduled for the educational adequacy. And I think what's really important to understand about those educational adequacy is getting the score and getting an understanding of that is one thing, but what's really relevant in our mind is hearing from the staff and from the teachers during those meetings. And at each one of these meetings, we've met with the principal, and then ideally the entire teaching staff at the school, and everybody from the librarian down to the teachers. Obviously, for the high school and to some degree at the middle school, not so much, but we had to shrink it down a little bit just because of the sheer size of it and get department heads and talk to them. But this is a reflection of what we heard at those times. Those meetings were anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours, depending on the size of the school. And we got a lot of really key information. There was really 8 targets and key points. And what's nice about that is it just gives you a consistency and understanding kind of some of the things that are adequate, inadequate, and that could use some support. This first slide really talks about core curriculum and specialty programs and the capacity for each of those programs. Obviously, core curriculum is your basic educational spaces, whereas specialty is more like art, music, science, and really kind of gives us a sense for that. You can see here, and I won't go into detail on every single bulletin, but I'll kind of quickly go through these. Probably no big surprise on some of these. Small main office for the most part at Scotts Mills, with a health room that has some accessibility challenges. because of having to access it through to get to the library. Um, the library is small, and the LRC is currently used for special education. I, I want to also step back a little bit and kind of preface this by saying this is a reflection of when we met. So some of these things may have changed since then. Obviously, for you know to accommodate COVID and kind of where we're at with that, but also you're going to hear some things that may or may not be uncomfortable here, and it's not our intent um, to be negative. It's just this is just a reflection of what we've heard, and it's by no means a reflection of the schools or how they're run or how they're maintained or anything like that. It is it's just a summarization of what we've heard. So I hope that makes some sense. Um, the the gym at Scotts Mills is used by the YMCA quite a bit, so there is some community use, and they really were working towards or would like to be a STEAM school: science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Um, and in order to do that, they would require a science at the K-5 level. So that was kind of a program requirement that was identified. That would be nice. Um, technology, there's some inadequate coverage in some areas currently, with some of the voice commands and the AP being a little bit incoherent. And again, inadequate coverage at recess for announcements. Um, the supervision and security, and this is something that you'll see at a lot of schools, not just obviously not just in Silver Falls School District, but all over the place. Passive supervision and controlled entries are much more on the forefront, you know, in the last 10 to 15 years for good reason. And so when a lot of these were built, they weren't built with that necessarily in mind. So you'll see some of that. Although Silver Falls School District does have the standard for the camera at the front with the buzzed entry, which is good there. Main entry adjacent to student drop-off secures the campus. Um, instructional aids, what instructional aids are storage, you know, tackable surfaces, virtual displays, things like that. As we know at Scotts Mills, the corridors are exterior with some coverings over them. And in those areas, the K-5 students have hooks that they mount their backpacks to. That was something that was brought up to us. There's really great teacher storage. There's a display at the main entry and some tackable surfaces for student art in the classrooms. And some of that furniture has been donated by the PTO. Some physical characteristics, and a lot of this will dovetail in with the facilities assessment as well. So we'll get some redundancy there. So with windows, the window conditions, you'll see that there as well. The school could benefit from a locker room, and a covered play would be a good programmatic addition there. The learning environment, it's what's the quality of the space that we're learning in. Some of the classrooms had some challenges with heat last winter. I guess it would have been the winter before. Some classrooms have air conditioning, some don't. And then doors are often propped open to get better ventilation in those classrooms. And so obviously that's something that it'd be ideal to be taken care of. The gym and cafeteria have a good relationship to one another. So those relationship of spaces and proximity of spaces is good. Although the commingling of buses and the parent drop off is a little bit of a safety concern there. And then, you know, just kind of some of the physical conditions of that parking lot with bottoming out there. And then no sidewalks to the school. That's outside of the school's purview, but it's something to work with potentially with the city on. So again, really quick, went through that. I think it's good if we stop and kind of maybe get some feedback and some thoughts relative to that. One, if you are familiar with Scotts Mills or, know more about it than obviously we would, that might be a good thing to observe. But just some kind of general thoughts, observations, feedback. And I think, we'll spend maybe about 5 minutes on this. But if we if we go under, that's fine too. So, um, and we'll try to categorize it as best we can under these same characteristics, so we can kind of start seeing some commonalities there. So feel free to pop those in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat as well and adding those. These will be placed into the minutes, and we'll get a kind of a good understanding there. So anyways, with that, I'll be quiet. If we have any thoughts and observations or feedback relative to Scotts Mills.
Maybe to help the group get started, one of the observations that I wanted to make is that all the classrooms it's a California style school with all the hallways outside. So they're always going outside. That help?
Yeah, my name is Jackie Renaud, and I was a student at Scotts Mills and actually lived just about 3 houses down from it. So I do know a little bit about the building. I know it was just recently seismically upgraded in the gym, and I think other places within the building. With the last grant, they had a library remodel. It's beautiful, but it's very small still. And I think probably within the last, maybe it was 6 weeks ago, I think the alarm system is hokey. So it will automatically go off, and the neighbors hear it. I'm close enough that if our windows are open, we can hear it going off. So I definitely think something, some sort of integrity within the alarm system. There's something wrong with that. But yeah, it's an outside hallway system, cold. So those areas aren't really used for more than just traveling from one space to another.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, comments, feedback on Scotts Mills?
Oh, there was one other thing I do remember. I don't know how many years ago it was, but because it is and it has that outer shell being exposed to the weather so much, I think the pipes froze and it burst. And so their whole computer lab was pretty much blown out, and they got it insured and everything. But you have that kind of temperamental weather exposing the building differently than a building that's all in, the hallways are all cared for and warmed. I'm not too sure. They don't have, I know they were working on a drinking fountain, one of the filtered ones. But other than that, that's the only thing I can think of right at this moment.
Just to update you on a couple of those items. So the water line that burst was rerouted in 2016 when we did the seismic upgrade. And so we moved that to prevent that from happening in the future. But yeah, one of the big challenges is the fact that the hallways were all covered after the fact too. So I believe those were all opened, and then they did a project and put those covers on, and it's quite challenging the way it's constructed. Makes great birds' nests also.
Oh,
So Lauren, while we were out there, you talked about maybe a field improvement or a parking lot, or you're not required to share that, but I was hoping you would.
Okay, well, I know that the PTC and really would like to put some parking area over in the west side of the field. Obviously, there's a lot of issues with pickup, drop off, bus congestion, etc. So that's definitely an issue. One of the other issues we have is a storm drain in the in the playground area. That's huge. The pavement's all falling apart, but yet we need to do storm drain in the process of repaving all that stuff. So, I mean, I could go on and on probably about maintenance issues, but I think we're we're looking at a lot of the other problems also.
I have a question real quick. In the old report, there was, I guess, a miscellaneous item here and a comment made that younger students are uncomfortable sharing a restroom with the older students. I'm not familiar with Butte or Scotts Mills particularly. I don't know if anybody, does that means we have to build another bathroom, or is this just a procedural thing?
That's
Well,
that's a good.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
the bathroom, the boys and girls restroom is accessible only by the outside hallway. I think it's also where the staff uses as well. I don't know if there's any other bathroom, to be honest with you, on the facility or in the facility.
So the staff have to go through the student restrooms to get to, there's a little single a door off of the student restrooms that go into the staff restrooms currently.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. And then we had a question about how close is it to capacity? I don't know that off the top of my head. Do we know that, Lauren, or?
I do not have the answer to that question, unfortunately.
Okay.
The capacity analysis is one of the steps in the process. So we will be circling back on that, and it's based on how many instructional spaces you have, the target enrollment, and how many kids you have at grade level. So there are some variables to it, but it's pretty straightforward. And the maps that we create, the building maps, we will identify how many instructional spaces and what your average class size, and that'll be a good indicator. It's not perfect, but it's a good place to start. So we'll go ahead and make those a goal for our next meeting because those are part of the analysis.
Thank you. And then there was one more comment related to the covered play. And we did capture that. I probably just glossed over it. That was one of the comments made by the staff there.
And then there
Thank
was
you for that.
there was also a comment about the phone system. So needing upgrading, that certainly is an improvement of technology. Lauren, what's the current phone status out there?
I mean, they're older systems. I don't know exactly what type they have out there. I don't typically deal with the phones. I know that the intercom and the phone system are tied in together. We have constant problems with the phones and the intercom out there. So,
okay, so let's put that on the list. Thank you very much.
yeah, they both need replaced.
One more. I had trouble trying to get the sticky notes to move and type, but I substitute taught at Scotts Mills a few times, and it was a combined 7th and 8th grade math science class, and I only had to do math at the time, but the classroom would have been really not very well suited for a wide range of science labs.
Great. You got that, Angela? Thanks, Ray.
One other thing that's pretty big on the list that was on the list is the heating system out there. The majority of that building, multiple classrooms are still heated on oil furnaces, and we've been having a lot of problems with those. And that's why a couple of those classrooms are without heat. And we're actually still troubleshooting some intermittent problems with that system right now.
Great. Thanks, Lauren.
And on the chat, there was another reference to covered play. Jonah.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Richard. So I think we'll move along to Robert Frost here and review that. Again, same order, but as anybody that knows Robert Frost, the kind of the model that was built there at the time was a little bit of the open school concept when that was built. So as a result, it's got that kind of learning space in the middle with the pie-shaped classrooms that are inefficient and are a challenge for any more than 25 students. Office space is shared with inadequate itinerant conference and testing space. Food is served in the media center, eaten in the classrooms, and there's some poor queuing as it relates to that. But the media center has ample space. And then this, we'll see this probably on all of these, the inadequate staff student restrooms. You see that at just virtually every school, not just Silver Falls School District. So that won't be a big surprise there. The previous art rooms currently programmed as a functional skills. Again, this was when we had met. There's a kiln in that space. So there is a dedicated art space, but it's being programmed as something else. It sounds like the music room is large with no designated science at the school right now, and that may that may change, but we will want to get a better understanding of that. Gym serves as a multi-purpose room, not adequate for capacity since it's used for all youth sports in Silverton. Community uses the large field extensively, and there's a student garden, and schools applying for a grant to improve that. Technology, there's one phone in each one of those three classroom pods. The Wi-Fi is adequate for general instruction, but is inadequate for testing and large program utilization. There's no built-in audio enhancement. Interactive projectors don't work properly and are replaced by smart TVs that are non-interactive. Inadequate coverage of fire alarm and public announcements during lockdown. I'm seeing in the chat that the kiln was removed a couple years ago, so we'll update that. Let's reflect that. The supervision and security, again, no passive supervision for parent drop-off and pickup. So we're seeing some parallels already with Scotts Mills. The main entry has camera with controlled entry. Again, a standard there. And then many of the exterior doors are often, again, propped open. And there is currently, and maybe it's already been installed, an extra camera that was scheduled to be installed at the delivery location. And then just around the perimeter, some challenges with homeless camps around the perimeter. So we could, again, like I said, we could already start seeing some commonalities between the schools. And as far as instructional aids, inadequate built-in casework, there's a lot of tackable wall surfaces, which is good. And the furniture is dated and in poor condition. Again, that's not uncommon at all for schools of this vintage. Mobile storage can be problematic for capacity. And then because of the configuration of those classrooms, there's some acoustical challenges between them, especially when AV is being used. No natural light in the art room, which is currently being used for functional skills in the music room. And the field does not drain properly. SPED does not have water currently where it's programmed, and the locker room is used for de-escalation, which makes it unavailable to other students when it's in use. Classrooms are often hot throughout the summer with windows that are not operable. Again, the propped open doors, we talked about that a little bit earlier. There's no accessible student restrooms. And then in order to get to public spaces, you have to leave the classroom building, but there is good proximity of the garden field and covered play, which is good. Student access into the building has some safety concerns because of that. There's no safe routes to school, but an audit had been performed with one route that's been designated with a sidewalk. There's a lot of square footage overall with good access, but no accessible path to the field when it's raining. And that there's a comment on the chat about pie-shaped classrooms. Besides sounding delicious, they are kind of triangular shaped. I don't have a floor plan available at the moment, but
Yeah, the floor plans we have don't include that. It's incredibly complicated. So I tried to draw when I was out in the field. It was quite a challenge. But they're more trapezoids than pie. Yeah, they're somebody's taking a slice of pizza and taking a bite out of it.
It's Jackie again. I taught there for a little over 20 years as a classroom teacher in the library, and what it is it's basically 3 rooms, and they had movable walls. So they were accordion-like walls, and there was openings. So the 3 rooms essentially are open to each other. So it makes it hard to teach if you've got a louder teacher, and I'm probably a louder teacher. And so the noise travel in itself, and then the window capacity, if you were to try to block the classrooms in and actually put temporary walls, most likely that middle classroom would then have no window, period, through it. And there's a little back space behind that middle one that is kind of shared. It's just a really odd 70s building. And everything, of course, is carpet as well. So the classrooms are carpeted, which is nice for sound, I guess, but not so nice for cleanliness. And if they're eating, it is kind of gnarly. It's not a real sanitary environment in that way.
Great. And then we do have a couple comments in the chat. Has the old mod building been torn down yet? What's the old mod building?
So no, the old modular building is currently in use as a sped classroom.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And then do any of these issues become bigger concerns with the school changing to a K-5 versus a 3-5 grade level? Was another comment there.
I have a question. When we were looking at all the buildings, because I'm more on just the structural facility side of this group, this building seemed to have one of the best spaces to expand. And I don't know when you guys were doing your tour through it, on that backside where, you know, the flat blacktop underneath all those trusses, I was told that it was at some point kind of designed to possibly expand. And I don't know if you guys, when you were doing your tour, had been told that or saw that as an option to add more classrooms at a fairly cheap, whatever fairly cheap is, but as an option rather than adding modular buildings.
Lauren did share that with me, that it was designed for expansion. It'd have to be upgraded for the current codes. I mean, the other thing that I saw right off the top is you'd end up with more classrooms like the one you have with very minimal windows because it's a big square, but certainly it's achievable.
That was an area that we actually just did a seismic grant and retrofitted because they did not turn it into classrooms, and so it was not structurally sound. That was the one area of the building that needed a retrofit, was that covered play area.
Yeah. So Joshua, what I was referring to is separation. There's a limit to how much space you can have without firewalls. And then that was up against the classroom building. So you only had 2 walls really from which you could create windows or could have outdoor windows. So it would be like, I was not joking. Anything is achievable, but it would be really tough because there's very little daylight on those inside spaces. You can always do skylights, but we've all experienced that. It's okay, but it's not great.
One of the things that we discussed for that building potentially was to actually put a gym addition with some additional classrooms on the south side of the building. And that was when Leslie Roach was a principal there, and we talked about that.
Yep.
So
big open space. Yep, big open space would be good.
Yeah, there's some space over there to be able to expand.
Some historical perspective, and I'm the guy that raised the question about the word contemporary. And when Robert Frost was built, I believe in the early 70s, it was certainly considered to be a contemporary building. So I just really want to be, I'm suspicious about the use of that word. The other historical point, I was on the Silverton Elementary Board at that time, and we almost passed a bond issue in the mid 80s to replace Eugene Field with a contemporary school that would have been very similar to Robert Frost. And so it's interesting how that might have panned out for today.
That's some good historic perspective there, Ray. And I can certainly appreciate the especially hearing that the reluctance to talk about contemporary. I think it's some of the challenges with those schools, the open school concept back in the day was there was virtually no consideration taken towards acoustics. And that was one of the biggest challenges. What we've learned since then is that being able to create flexibility but still have the acoustical separation really helps a lot in creating different levels of learning in different learning models. So it's kind of taken some of the history and improving it dramatically. So I appreciate that perspective. Okay, great. So we'll move on to Butte Creek. Unless there's any other comments, I saw that the classrooms are very small, which we captured that there. This is all really great. I appreciate everybody's feedback on this. It gives us a good sense for, I think when we see this all pulled together in the colors, we'll get a good, kind of a good sense on what's top of mind for this committee. And that will help towards creating a more comprehensive vision.
I just have one question. It's probably for Jackie. In the last BBL architect report, there was a recommendation to remove those accordion walls and frame them in for the acoustics. But you're making that sound like that's not going to work well because of windows or ventilation?
So the accordion walls, when I first started there, I was in the multi-age room and we did have them open. And so they were removed back. It has the header at the top where the accordion would go. And then there is still an opening that isn't a doorway. There's no door. There's nothing that the teachers can go back and forth between the three. And it's just an odd, it's an odd thing. It's so difficult to explain it. But you only have access to, I think, 1, 2, 3 windows and then a fourth in the back cubby area. And so when you try to enclose them completely in so the sound doesn't travel, then one room would most likely not have any access to outdoor lighting, I think. And that would be the middle room.
Yeah.
The 2 corners would be okay. They have a window, but it's they're not big windows. Mark Twain, they have a ton of windows. Yeah. And Robert Frost has very few. It's kind of the back and forth.
And to add to the challenge at that time, they also were trying to keep the number of windows to a minimum. So then the windows are behind the barrier wall that's in the corner. And there's not enough windows, and they created barriers that actually block the windows.
Yeah, and I think when we look at kind of a solution to address some of these items, there's going to be some level where we'll have to take obviously what's there and existing into consideration for some of the minor stuff. But for some of it, like this one, I think it's probably a prime example. I wouldn't restrain ourselves by thinking that it should be what it is but better, if that makes any sense. So let's make the pie-shaped rooms but better. There's probably a better solution than that, I think. But that's something that we'll want to look at together as a group.
Yeah, a simple example of that is out at Glencoe High School. We recently did a design that changed their media center into like 8 classrooms because the media center needed to be smaller and needed to be up front. So if you think beyond what it is, then you can actually come up with another solution that really satisfies a couple needs.
Any other questions before we move on to Butte Creek?
I know the heating and cooling that was in the chat bar. I know there are teachers that would have super hot class and another would have a super cold class. So that's what I would hear when I was there from my colleagues. I don't know if that's been fixed or if that's been even addressed, to be honest with you.
Great, thanks, Jackie.
Yeah.
Okay. Butte Creek, going back to capacity, core curriculum. So Butte Creek was, this probably isn't a surprise to people, teachers and parents at Butte Creek, but they were very, very excited to share how excited they were about their school. So they were, they had a lot of really great things to say in general, and so that was pretty evident in their pride there. The classrooms have good amount of square footage, but not enough room for extended learning programs such as ELD. Second gym doubles as a cafeteria and has ample square footage. Office shared by 2 counselors. Not enough room for group activities larger than 4 participants. The library is warm and welcoming, which is good to hear. There's only 1 staff restroom. Again, another parallel there. Science is inadequate space for projects and circulation. The gym's utilized for youth basketball and volleyball and are used as capacity allows. There's space for a school garden, and 1 classroom right now is being used for green teams. When we move to the technology, gym has quality sound system that has ability to output in the student hearing aids. And the classrooms do have sound systems, is what we've heard. Every classroom has a smart TV and document cameras. The passive supervision here is good at the main office and looking out to the corridors. Main entry has that camera with the controlled entry. And then 6 additional cameras were installed throughout the school earlier in the year. Instructional aids, they'd like to have more storage for seasonal items, you know, Christmas and, you know, just the holidays or, you know, for events. There's inadequate project storage, but there's lots of tackable wall space. Classroom furniture is kind of in the middle of being replaced. It sounds like science was a challenge in that it only has 1 sink in the science classroom. Ideally, we want to have, you know, enough for group science, you know, 4 students or so per sink. A countertop dishwasher is used to wash students' science equipment at the end of the day. Drop-down cords in science are an attractive nuisance for the students there. Which that's one thing we always kind of go back and forth on. You know, a lot of districts don't like having, you know, outlets in the ground just from a maintenance standpoint and, you know, getting water in them or banging them up. So drop-down cords sometimes are the solution, but it sounds like Butte Creek, that's not the right solution there. SPED needs a sink and restroom because of the many evolving needs. The covered play area is partially enclosed, which is good for them. Space heaters are often used in the classroom because of just the temperature challenges there. And then the larger classrooms don't have enough power outlets. That's, again, not uncommon. Power outlets in schools of this age that's a big challenge, typically. Computer room has AC, and the PTA would like to add more ductless mini splits at classrooms, but not all classrooms have operable windows. And there's no windows in the offices near the gym or at the computer lab. Many of the windows are new and in good condition. And then the acoustics between the classrooms and the gym are a bit of a challenge, or between classrooms and next to the gym is a challenge. So that needs to be addressed. The school garden is easily accessed from the classrooms. That was the comment that we got from a relationship of spaces standpoint. What other items do we want to talk about at Butte Creek and observations there? If I get my survey here.
There is central air conditioning. This is a good question for all schools, as this improves ability to improve air quality in a time of COVID. So ventilation systems with a higher percentage of makeup air and filtration are good features about improving the safety of the students. That was my anecdote at the end.
Yeah.
I'm just agreeing.
Yeah, and that's something that districts far and wide are having a challenge with right now. I mean, even schools that are just opening, if MERV 13 filters is an example, if they're not properly balanced with the mechanical system, it can be a bit of a challenge. I heard Josh talking earlier about UV lighting and duct systems and things like that. You can also, you're starting to see that on fans, and so those are some good advancements related to that. But that is a big challenge right now, and we're helping a lot of schools out with that as much as we can.
There is a comment about the traffic on the highway around 3 o'clock. Not real surprised here, but this writer's noticed traffic has significantly increased over that stretch, over the last 10 years.
Can I speak to the traffic real quickly?
Please.
Hi, Eliza.
Hi, Eliza.
Just wanted to say that the traffic around 3 is at least steady and people are expecting cars to go in and out, but ODE will not allow us to change lights for after school activities. So like, especially on Wednesdays, a lot of times almost the majority of the students will be leaving the school in different vehicles at 4:30, but there's no lights to slow down. And the principal has had no success in trying to get ODE to change the lights for sort of some of those days where we have a higher level of traffic at an unusual time. I find that a lot of parents aren't aware that they're driving into a school that usually slows down to 20, but it isn't. And so there's like 60-mile-an-hour traffic coming at people thinking that they're going in and out of a slow parking lot. That's just an observation.
Thank you. We have another comment about questioning whether there's federal funding for improved ventilation systems. There was another supporter for better ventilation in schools. Sorry.
I'm not aware of any federal funding currently for that.
Not currently that I'm aware of, yeah. But hopefully that will change. Yeah.
Yes, it is definitely a need. Surprisingly enough, I'm surprised that we don't get more complaints regarding the heating system at Butte Creek, because we have they're basically like residential units that are tied together. And so when the heat goes out, it goes out to all the classrooms. And so everybody kind of gets, whatever everybody gets. So the spaces are not really controlled individually. We do have outside air, and surprisingly enough, that is what the one site I believe we have in the district that we are able to retrofit with MERV 13 filters.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So did we represent the fact that this is a fast highway and it's real dangerous? I think the issue is that it's incredibly dangerous with high speed.
A question on that is, I believe it's not necessarily ODE, but it's ODOT, because I believe that was a problem that they had with Eugene Field as well, is that you're talking about a state highway, and ODOT wants traffic moving. They don't want traffic slowing. And so that's one of the challenges I think that we deal with. And
You're
with the-
correct.
with
It is ODOT.
as well.
My apologies.
And ODOT marches by their own rules. It's very difficult to get cooperation from ODOT.
I have another, you guys are in my wheelhouse as far as what I was supposed to do on this committee, so I'm asking these questions. They were talking about the 1970 classroom edition not being accessible from the gym. And again, I'm not familiar with the building. My daughter is going to be going there next year, so I'm going to get more familiar. But then in the 1978 classroom, there seemed to be a recommendation to demolish the 270 classrooms, 1970 classrooms, providing a new building addition. And granted, I don't really know what they're talking about out there. From everything I've heard, the building's fine, so I'm a little confused.
Is that from the BBL, Josh? Yeah.
So that would be probably referring to the classrooms that, as far as I know, I don't know if it's actually a modular, excuse me, that was tied into the building, excuse me. But it would be on the northwest corner, those two classrooms. And you have to go down, and they kind of built a hallway out there. And it's rooms 1 and 2, I believe, are actually the room numbers.
I'm happy to speak to that. I mean, those are the first 2 classrooms at the north end of the building. They wrap around from that one image that you had at the beginning that showed the playground. So you would walk outside from those classrooms to get to the cafeteria or inside. But those classrooms have limited air. There's a drop down when you walk into them, like they're on flat cement. It's a little bit of a different vibe. You kind of feel like you're down in like the hood or something when you're in that area of the building. My daughter went to school in the last 2 years in those classrooms, and there's not a lot of air control there. But they are large classrooms, and they both have sinks that don't have hot water.
Great. Thanks, Eliza. And then did we get any more comments in the chat here before we move on to the next school? Bigger issues, lack of cooling systems in the summer. The middle school can become 100 degrees. That's pretty hot. So it sounds like there's some balancing challenges there and lack of cooling. Okay. Great. Moving on to Victor Point, the educational adequacy here. What we heard there was the LRC is currently housed in a computer lab, which has no extended learning or elevator access. Media center is also used as a cafeteria, but students eat in the classroom. Food is paid for in the corridor. No dedicated health room or nurse's office. Counseling, ELL, and speech happen in same itinerant office. Does not function well for other special services. SPED does not have a designated space. Music happens in the media center when on site, when music is on site. The school has a great drama program with 60 to 80 students, which I thought was really impressive. Art is integrated into each classroom, so it's not a designated space for art. 6-8 science does not have enough square footage. The PE has developed over the last 6 years, and the covered play was being built when we visited on site when Richard was out there. The existing gym is large, which is good. Media center is used for community meetings and it's too small. And there's a courtyard with planters there. Technology, 2 teachers currently use audio enhancement. Staff uses the technology well, with every classroom having a smart TV, projector, and document camera, which is, we've heard that before. No fire system. Alarm is not connected to the district, and there's no pull stations and no fire annunciator panel currently. The site was fenced last year, or would have been the year before, and has a controlled entry point. The main entry has a camera with controlled entry, and they'd like to add cameras at the back entry and at the middle school entrance. Instructional aids. There's one display case. There's bulletin boards outside of each classroom. Chairs are aging and there's not a lot in surplus. There's not enough storage at core curriculum, which disrupts the learning environment. PE doesn't currently have storage, but the new covered play is being built with storage. Physical characteristics, K2 has 2 outlets per classroom. Restroom fixtures need replacement. Kitchen equipment needs to be replaced. Cafeteria lacks hand wash sinks, not enough there. Classrooms have had a seismic upgrade, which also replaced much of the lighting and flooring, so that was a positive thing. There's ample science equipment thanks to the parent club. Learning environment, middle school has AC, but K6 does not. The heating system is relatively new with older ductwork, multiple rooms on one thermostat, which causes balancing issues. And then ducting filtration doesn't work well, and there's issues with dusty and recycled air. The media center gets warm, there's operable windows throughout, and ADA challenges include no elevator, uneven floors to the gym, and no access at the back of the school. For relationship of spaces, LRC is accessed through the gym, and students with mobility issues can't access the LRC without assistance, and students don't generally walk to the school. The playground works well for the school.
So Lauren, did you have something?
Jump in and correct one issue. The fire alarm, there is a functional fire alarm there. It does have pull stations at each exit, but it is a 120 volt pull station system. There are bells in the building to evacuate the building. So it does have a functional system, but it's very old, antiquated, and it does not call the fire department. There's no detection devices whatsoever. So if it catches fire at night, nobody will know except for the neighbors.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah. Anything else? Okay.
Yeah, so that building on the back side of the gym where I think they call it the LRC, Miss Kenzie, who's I know here, she's a secretary at that school. She can attest to this. If you are in a wheelchair, you can't get up there. It's a big problem. That school has lots of ADA issues. Now, it's a fantastic school, but they're so limited on space up there, and they're doing their best to try to just use everything they can. And even when that room, I guess I've heard from the teachers, and my daughter goes there, when it rains, you can't hear anything in that room. I guess it is so loud that it's very difficult to even teach kids in that room. I believe that's where their computer lab is. So they got some issues with how to solve that problem, because I imagine that could be a potential lawsuit, maybe, if somebody's feeling excluded and not being able to get into that space. So something to maybe address.
Yeah, Jonah, I have it in my notes as a warped entry. What they did is they put an addition at a higher elevation and then just connected the dots without any consideration of wheelchair access.
Gotcha.
I think Josh also talking about the computer lab, which is actually upstairs in the gym. It's stairwell access only.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there was a question about an LRC, Learning Resource Center. It at Victor Point, what is the LRC? It has many definitions. So it could be breakout for media. It could be breakout areas for one-on-one tutoring. It could take on any different maturations, but it's basically a breakout space or a pull-out space. It could also be a media center, aka a library. So it has lots of definitions. And I was hoping somebody could tell us exactly at your point what that definition is.
I think LRC for most of us in our district is where some title kids might meet or IEP students.
Okay.
So it's for kids who are struggling with learning and they get an extra dose. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Another thing I wanted to add really quick about Victor Point and just give them kudos to their staff and the community around there is they almost self-funded that. And they got a lot of help from, I think, a grant too, but that covered building they built, that was impressive. And
Yeah.
I don't know if we talked about that much, but I mean, they've really made a great modification to that facility.
Great. Moving on to Mark Twain. So enrollment's increasing. There's not enough room currently.
So remember, Jonah, this was when it was two separate. It was Mark Twain was the 3-5.
The K2.
Or the K2.
It was the K2. Yeah.
Okay, but there you go. So remember, this is before it got changed into a K5, which is forthcoming.
So so again, some of these may be a little dated, but there's at the time there's 3 dedicated spaces for ELD. Title I's housed in the locker room. 3 lunch periods separated by grade level. Not enough space in the copy room. You have to circulate through the health room, which is not ideal. There's a room dedicated for social and emotional learning through an itinerant space for Trillium and other programs. Library does not accommodate a full classroom easily. Has had seismic upgrades, which is good. And the restrooms were designed for a middle school, so the toilets for K2 especially are too high. The specialty programs, there's not enough storage to have art and music, so it sounds like that's the biggest challenge there. And no dedicated space currently for science. Gym's not large enough for community use and lacks restrooms. And there's no seating for visitors, no access controls for after hours use or zoning. And they'd like to start a garden and composting program, but they're trying to find some square footage for that. You can see some of the seismic upgrades there. The technology upgrades have happened recently, courtesy of grant funding. Again, outlets in classrooms. All classrooms have TV or projector. Some are hooked up to Apple, some are hooked up to smart TV. The alarm's still on the old system, and Lauren, you might have more clarity on this, but doesn't direct to the fire department. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's basically also a 120 volt pull station system, no photo detection, so no smoke detection. It just basically it will evacuate people from the building when somebody pulls a pull station, and that's it.
Gotcha. Okay. There's no security system in place. Perimeter fencing has recently been installed. The main entry has a buzz in, again, similar to the other schools. Campus is spread out, and there's a lot of places to hide, so that passive supervision is a challenge there as it relates to that. There's little tackable surface. Art and announcements are often taped on the lockers and walls. There's one display that's accessed through the health room. There's a mixture of new furniture and old with no overall procurement plan. Many of the upgrades are self-purchased. The gym doesn't have enough standards for game lines, in the ELD location is not ideal. Logistics of getting students there and back is a challenge. In Title I classroom has issues with flooding there. I don't know if you have any insight into that one, Lauren, that comment that was provided on that classroom.
Well, actually, that whole site has storm drain issues, and we recently had the library flood, the gym flooded, and the ELD is actually the old locker room, I believe, and so that whole area flooded. The problem is all of Church Street drains down into the parking lot, the front parking lot of Mark Twain, and all we have is one catch basin with a 4-inch outlet that runs down the hill and daylights. So there's severe storm drain issues with that site being on that hill.
Yeah.
And there's no infrastructure for the city there for us to tie into. So we'd have to run anything all the way down to Mill Street.
Gotcha. The learning environment, windows are old and outdated, and there's some holes in windows. The gym has wheelchair lift for accessibility. ADA access to the front of the building is provided by a gravel pathway. The gym and cafeteria don't have good proximity to one another. The footprint in the school does not allow for easy parking. Once staff is parked, there's little room for parents. And there was a safe routes to school audit. Sidewalks in hilly environment make access a challenge. New sidewalks on the south side of building were installed during seismic upgrade. And then just the topography on the site, obviously accessibility challenges related to that. And then when it's rainy, that can cause some challenges there as well. All right.
We have a couple comments, Jonah. It was a
Yeah.
discussion about the creating more space, and the ELD is the old home ec. Title is the old locker room. Library was recently cut in half to create a new classroom. So that
Gotcha.
you got those?
Yeah, we're grabbing those real quick here.
Okay. Yeah, and then the classrooms are really hot. They've been, the school loaned teachers standalone AC unit last year. And I've seen the parking and drop off and pickup is a nightmare because there's only one road.
So on the parking and drop off, and I think Lauren's question about the drainage in the future, I think it's a perfect opportunity. We were talking about including the city in these plannings because you have a dead end street basically where Church Street goes, where you have all your traffic coming in. And I think the long-term discussion needs to be had with the city down along the old Redmond plant where the Forest River is now. Is there ever a chance of a new road getting punched in to help circulate the traffic around that building? I mean, this is a perfect case of when I think we need to have the city involved in what's going on.
That's great, Jason.
Yeah, hi there, I'm Jason Gottfried, the Community Development Director
Hey,
of the City of Silverton.
Hi, Jason. Sorry.
To kind of chime in. Yeah, there is some undeveloped property to the north of that site. So the city doesn't build roads per se. When development happens and there's a plan for a road, those developments put roads in during that process. So that's something that kind of is listed on our TSP and our circulation plan as potential roadway connections in the future for that kind of at the end of Church Street to west towards Mill Street.
So just out of curiosity, I know there's been a lot of talk about the new development that's going off of 213 that's going to connect down by the back of the industrial park.
Mm-hmm.
Has there ever been any talk about a street at the back of that connecting through where the old railroad trestle was, or the railroad tracks were, out to that area?
Yeah, the street layout for that subdivision is essentially a north-south street that bisects that property and then tees at the top end east and west to both the extents of the property, and then more or less what they could get connected to Liberty Street. There's some right-of-way and private property issues, so there's at least an emergency connection, emergency access connection to Liberty Street. But that street, that subdivision will be building that essentially east-west street along its northern property line that is adjacent to the industrial park.
So there's a couple more questions. How much of the property belongs to Mark Twain? Does any, Lauren, I know you know the boundaries.
To be quite honest, I don't know the exact boundaries down there, but I know that we do own a chunk that is to the north of what we're currently utilizing. But where that stops and becomes somebody else's property, I don't know. I have not really researched it.
Okay, thank you. There's one comment about bullet holes in the windows, and it gives kindergarten parents a pause when they leave their kids there for the first time.
Yes, there are some pop outs from BBs, bullets. Here, there's actually quite a few of them. Those are old single pane windows. Most of them are, all of the putty in a lot of the area is asbestos containing. So it's a challenge and a very expensive process to replace those.
There's another comment about could it get tied into the city? There could be a possible storm water facility built in conjunction with a parking lot where a larger pipe could daylight. So it's a stormwater facility being created to address the poor drainage at the front. Is that right, Brandon?
Yeah. Let's see here. Start video.
Thank you.
Seems like a lot of our jobs that I work with a construction company, and a lot of the new schools seem like they have a water quality facility on site. Doesn't need to be huge like some of these new high schools are, but something that I think even the newer Silverton High School might have something like that. But if you couldn't get it tied into the city, maybe something with just enough drainage, a little pond with drain rock and topsoil where you can put a 12-inch pipe instead of a 4-inch.
To your point, Brandon, you're exactly right. There are instances with school districts have to collect the stormwater off their parking lots, and they do put it into a detention pond, if you would, and then there are galleries underground that store those. They're expensive, but not ridiculously expensive, but certainly that is an option. We're doing one in another school district that's not a very big parking lot, but it's $60,000. But it is maintained. It is all that stormwater is being contained on site. So you're right.
I mean, I know they can get pretty spendy depending on how big they are and what it is, but just if it's probably, I don't know, if it keeps flooding, I don't know, something needs to happen, but tie into the city would obviously be ideal, I would imagine.
Yeah. And they still would probably want some stormwater management and maybe even some filtration.
Yeah, an outlet.
Yeah. Well, the first time we had the flood up there, I met with the city administrator, Christian.
Thanks, Brandon.
When he was here. We talked about possibilities, but unfortunately it's flooded again since then. one of the challenges, like I said, is there's no storm drain on that Church Street. So everything kind of comes down the hill and unfortunately kind of runs into Mark Twain. We did look at trying to increase the size of the existing, but they basically said we would still have to run it down to Mill Street. So
Okay.
that's going to take some work. And actually, I've been talking with the city maintenance supervisor about some of those issues just today. So
Thanks, Lauren. So we got a couple more comments. I want to make sure we get them in before we move on. There is no city drain, there is a city drain in Small Creek to the north of Mountain. Only 2 usable outlets in the library. It is a mid-century modern school, so yeah, there's not any power at all. The pathway to the playground from up the hill, downhill is messy, especially here in Oregon. Covered area is constantly a wet, muddy mess. There's someone who indicates that Mark Twain might be 16 acres. Ah, yes, Aaron, oh no. Another reference to the play area and getting down there. 16, oh, look at Lauren, 16.3 acres. Thank you. And thank you, Eliza. You were spot on.
Great.
There is some room to work with.
Great. All right, we'll move on to Silverton Middle School here. Last but not least. So a lot of this we've talked about before and saw when we toured through on that third meeting. But it was good hearing from Brett and his team out there, firsthand perspective from their perspective. And again, capacity, some of this may be different now, but currently 9 portables on site that are used for instruction. 6 of them are general education. 1's that CTE, that video tech, and 2 are SPED. I don't remember, Lauren, how many do we have now? Is it 9 still? I should know this off the top of my head.
yes, that's still accurate.
There's 3 SPED in the main building and 2 in the portables, as I mentioned before. LRCs in the portables. SLP and functional skills are in the building. Cafeteria is large enough for 3 lunch periods, but it'd be preferable to have 2 there. The main office is on Schlater Street, alternate entrance on James, where there's no office. That's a challenge from a supervision standpoint. The main office is separated from health and workrooms too small. There's no office for the assistant principal. I see in the chat a question about SPED. That's special education. The 2 counselors share a storage room. There's no consolidated student services. The library has capacity for 37 students. That's what's listed there. Does not have a computer flex space in the classroom. Instruction is inadequate. Would prefer more of a media center type environment. Staff restrooms are only accessible through the locker rooms. Students in classrooms along James Street use restrooms in the locker rooms. So they have to go through and use those locker rooms for the restrooms. There's not enough restrooms for students and staff. And I also see that it's actually 11 modular classrooms and for middle school now and 2 for high school sports. That's right. Yep, because we have that one over by the field. Music's in the previous weight room where there's inadequate ventilation, poor lighting. Music shares its space with athletic storage. I don't know, is this still true with that portable ad there?
Athletic storage is less of an issue now, I believe. but it's still being used for music and still has the other issues. But I'll let Brett speak to that also.
Yeah, that got solved for the most part. Yeah, so there's 7 mods total. One of them is just at the high school. So for the middle school, there's 6 mods, but 11 classrooms. Yeah, switch some things around, but yeah, the football stuff is now all in the football mod that's out by the track on the north side.
Most of the CTE happens at the high school, but we do have videotech that's in one of those portables, and you'd prefer more on-site CTE programs. There's 3 PE spaces, and they're adequate in size. Locker rooms are outdated, and the gym is shared with cafeteria during rainy day recess. Gym and cafeteria are used by the community. There's a couple of greenhouses that aren't currently scheduled. No staffing to support those programs currently. Adequate space for art, however, the location is not ideal. School would prefer a more centralized location. It'd be ideal if there's more transparency into the art room to create more integration. Technology, classroom technology works well. The Wi-Fi network works well. Library uses a lot of extension cords. Science outlets often short out and could use more power just generally in the classroom. Smart TVs not used unless students are presenting to a class. Social studies and math are online. Students could benefit from more one-to-one Chromebooks. Fire systems is adequate. However, there are unsprinkled areas. There seems to be ample fire extinguisher cabinets, and there is a fire enunciator panel. Seismic upgrades are needed. And some of these pictures you'll see, these are through the condemned portion or the closed down portion here. There are many areas that don't allow for passive supervision. James Street side's particularly poor. Bus drop off is passively supervised from the office. Parent drop off pickup is supervised from outside. Students and visitors enter on Schlater Street side. Auxiliary student entrance is on James Street. Some areas do not have fencing or physical barriers. Not all classrooms are accessed from the inside. See that here in the lower left-hand corner. Students use staff keys to enter the building on the James Street to get to the bathrooms in those locker rooms. The abandoned portion of the building obscures vision and bisects the campus. It's right there in the middle. So that's a challenge there. There's not a lot of landscaping to obscure passive supervision. Instructional aids, quality and quantity varies between programs. There's a lot of seasonal storage in the occupied building. The condemned portion is the only storage opportunity. Art has no storage, portables have no storage. Any potential storage space has been repurposed into offices. Lockers aren't used often, are not located well. Limited display at the main entry. There are televisions for announcements at both entries. Cafeteria has some display. Outdoor classrooms do not have display. Some classrooms can't be tacked into because there's ACM or asbestos containing material in those walls. Furniture is outdated and doesn't work well. The art budget often goes to broken stools and teachers often buy their own furniture. Physical characteristics, again, some of this right here is in the middle portion. Half of the instruction happens in the portables. Cafeteria and corridors are used for extended learning. There's no extended learning in portables. Art's in better condition than most of the building, but is inadequate compared to other middle schools. Science sinks do not work and are electrical problems. Some of these things have been decommissioned and that space is unusable. CTE happens in a portable with videotech. The gym curtain subdivides the gym into 2 learning spaces, which is something that we typically see. Gym mezzanine has a low ceiling, and there's 1 gym for athletics. Locker rooms are not adequate, and the stadium has turf, but it is used for high school football. Physical characteristics, you can see some of the seismic upgrades that were done here in 2016, I believe, Lauren, when that conversion was done. Functional skills does not have sensory or calm down room. Staff restroom has been converted to accessible restroom, but is inadequate. Wheelchairs and other ambulatory Devices are stored in corridors, which is a challenge from an exiting standpoint, or it can be. SPED, special education, would be adequate if the high school moved their storage out. I'm not sure if this has changed with those portables being added or not. There's no designated performance area. There was a performance area in the old portion of the building. Students used the high school auditorium to showcase their work. Band and choir share the same space. Band stores equipment in the hallway outside of the cafeteria. In the learning environment, the portables have decent AC. The heat on James Street and then the gym is inadequate, and there's no heating in the corridors. There's no ventilation in storage or repurposed offices. Ventilation and purpose is inadequate in general. Some levels of radon are present, and there's no operable windows except for the portables. Cafeteria and gym daylighting are inadequate. Acoustics are poor in classrooms in between cafeteria and adjoining spaces. Heaters are loud and impact teaching and learning. Students cannot access the mezzanine. There's not enough exits for efficient egress. And there's no automatic door openers for students with ambulatory challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges from the relationship of spaces standpoint is this middle portion. That's probably no big surprise. But the gym is used for circulation, which impacts the PE program. Locker rooms are used to access restrooms on the James Street. We talked about that. Students have to go outside to access some of those classrooms and portables. Classrooms don't have good proximity, shared spaces, so there's often multiple trips made. There's no covered outdoor learning. Tables adjacent to portables serve as outdoor learning. Parking access is good for staff, and there are multiple staff parking locations adjacent to the classroom of choice. Visitor parking occurs at district parking lot. Joint parking for athletics and community use is a challenge for flow, and athletic bus parking for visiting teams is problematic. There's access to the fields for PE, but other gathering and play is inadequate. So before I get into that, is there anything that we missed? I know that's a lot at the middle school, but is there anything that we want to capture in addition to that?
It may have gone by fast. Did you talk about the cafeteria occupancy?
I talked about the media center, but the cafeteria having the 3 lunch periods.
Well,
you're referring to?
We did, but I changed it. I mean, we violate the cafeteria occupancy every day because we're pushing 500, and if it wasn't for the COVID stuff and hybrid stuff, we're pushing 515 for this year, 520, and so we're well beyond what we could do in terms of cafeteria capacity. And for the people who went to Silverton High School in terms of the locker rooms, the only issue, and again, my relationship with the high school is very good, and we've worked through lots of things like the modular thing and the music room, but the locker rooms were essentially cut in half, and actually even more than half. And so I've got 3 grades of kids who need to use lockers, but because football has to use locker rooms and store their stuff, we have football lockers in there. And so, which are huge. And so we can't get even close to as many lockers. And then we're having 3 PE classes having to change and get ready and at the same time. And so anyway, the capacity issue in the locker room, the capacity issue in the cafeteria, along with everything else that you talked about. I just wanted to make sure we talked about that.
Yeah.
And then Lauren, I had a question for you, is just so I can clarify it. The condemned space, is there a water line that goes from connecting the buildings? So even we have to maintain the dead space so it doesn't collapse on us just for that water line. So roofing and I don't know, the cost of maintenance for a condemned building seems crazy to me.
So it's not the water line, because we actually had to rerun a new water line to open up the building because the water lines all froze through the old building. And so we ran a new underground water line to feed the area A, or the, I guess it would be the east, southeast wing. And so, but everything else runs through that building. Your main power goes into that building and distributes through that building to both sides and both areas that we're currently using. The intercom is the main intercom is in that building. The phone system is in that building. And so there are a lot of things to just tear down that building that you would have to try and refeed back. And if you don't have another building going back in place, then you know, you've got a lot of work to do from a temporary aspect, if that makes sense.
And one good example of maintaining the old building and how it affects the new building, and Lauren, you can explain what happened, but this has been an issue. The same thing that has been happening, I talked to my dad about it, when it rains really hard for the last 60 years, happened the day before school started, where, Lauren, do you want to say what happened with the main circuit breaker?
Oh, so unfortunately, when they redid the roof, there's a low area of roof that will plug up occasionally, and the water, it's right on top of the MDP, the main distribution panel, with the main breaker for the building. And so when that happens, water runs in down onto the main distribution panel. Where the main power comes in. And we had an issue with that, and it took us quite a while to get it dried out. It popped the breaker. It's kind of a real challenge because the school didn't have any power. So there, when it comes to roofing and the design, that space should have an overflow drain, but we're talking about a roof that's well beyond its usable life. And one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face with that building, if we don't do something in the very near future, is roofing.
Yeah.
So
And you're
really
talking
single ply roofing that is over the top of an old asbestos built up roofing.
And you're talking specifically about the condemned portion, Lauren, in that roofing piece.
So that's actually, it's part of the old building. It's the original section of the boiler room. And so it's right adjacent to where it's a half old and half new room. But it's just, it was a low section of roof that they never engineered properly when they did the roofing. So when the drain plugs, it builds up and then it flows in through a combustion air release vent.
Jeez.
I don't know, and I don't know if it was mentioned, because again, it was really thorough. The acoustics of the areas, I'm not sure if that was talked about, but because they had to cover up the asbestos, the 17%, I think, Lauren, they painted over it with really thick stuff to keep the asbestos in, which then created terrible acoustics in the cafeteria and a couple rooms, because that asbestos popcorn stuff is really good
Right.
sound. So that was another thing. I'm not sure if it was on that list.
Yeah,
that wasn't detailed on there specifically, but anyway, sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
yeah, that is definitely an issue. Cafeteria and rooms, 3, 4, 5, I believe, are the rooms that in the office area. But that combined with the hard floor, and the acoustics are horrible in there, no question.
Gotcha. Okay. Looks like we captured that there. Okay. So we've got a little bit more to visit on the middle school here before we get into our next exercise. Do we want to take a 5-minute break, or do you guys just want to plow through? What do you think? I think it sounds like we're good to go. So what you see here is is just, and you saw a version of this last time. This is just that overall scoring matrix related to the educational adequacy. Those different categories that we shared with you. This is kind of how how the average score was. And some of these dovetailed actually pretty nicely with the facilities, just kind of the condition and what we saw there, which I thought was really interesting. I found it pretty intriguing. You know, we know that the middle school has a lot of challenges, but when we looked at educational adequacy, especially when it comes to the core curriculum and specialty programs, we're not really evaluating so much on the unhoused portion of the space. So there's an additional challenge related to just having students in portables that isn't really currently reflected in here. So that, I mean, if it was, I think this aggregated score would actually be lower. But you can see that the 2 is adequate and then 0 is totally inadequate. So that's kind of how those shook out. And this is based on the staff at each individual school in scoring that. So
Jonah, I would like to point out that on the middle school, it did get a 0.1 on core curriculum capacity. I mean, you're pretty close to 0.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not necessarily reflected because the teachers that have the portables actually like some of the characteristics of a module. It's got a little bit more control, but anyway, it's not a weighted factor, if you would.
Mhm.
But when we start looking at the capacity analysis, it's going to say that you're grossly under capacity or you're over capacity with the square footage you have, because ODE doesn't want you to include the modulars. If you
Yeah.
take the modulars out of the middle school, you don't have a school.
Right.
So that will be the next piece. That's all I'm trying to introduce, is that's the next piece when we start looking at capacity. That's a part of the formula.
Right. Thanks for that clarification, Richard.
Could you summarize again briefly how these numbers were determined, the algorithm, the rules of the game?
Absolutely. Richard, did you want to talk about that a little bit? And I could pull up a spreadsheet really quick if we want to show that as an example as you're talking.
Yeah, so Ray, the Oregon Department of Education established the criteria that we were supposed to use in determining educational adequacy. Now, since you asked it before, it's part of the checking the boxes. And they have a question on what is the educational adequacy of every school. So we took their criteria and put a basic element of either there's only 3 levels, and even that's generous. It's not totally inadequate, it's marginally adequate, and teachers do a great job, and it's adequate. So we keep the numbering system pretty simple. So you can see it right here. We have 5 or 6 questions that are related in the top category, related specifically to capacity. And we ask them very specifically, the core capacity or core curriculum for a middle school is special needs, the general ed, cafeteria, the office, counseling, media center, and then restrooms. And you could have that and have a basic school. So how is the capacity of the school in terms of instructional space for the staff? How do they perceive it? And you can see they had media center was marginally adequate out of all of those categories. And that resulted in a score of 0.1 or 1 point when you aggregate the whole thing. So we go through each one of these categories and give an overall score for a numerical score for the school based on the sum of all of those adequacies. It's not scientific, but it's a good litmus test. Now, what's interesting in doing these several times, teachers are very, very adaptable. And sometimes they're just, in the good case is the modular classroom. Some teachers love them because they have control over the AC or the heating and the cooling. They have their own classroom. They only share it with one other person. There's some teachers will love it. Other teachers don't like it because it doesn't have storage and it's separated from the school. Kids have to go outside. So it is biased by what the teacher's perception is, but they're the best resource we have to gaining an educational adequacy score, if you would.
Okay, thank you. So, but the number of people who decide it's a 0 or a 1, that would be 3 or 4 staff members?
No,
No,
no.
go ahead, Jonah.
It's I don't remember, Brett, at Silverton Middle how many we had, but at the smaller schools it's virtually every teacher. So what we want to do is work with the principal and the administrators and have all the teachers. And so I mean it's some of them are the size of this group right now, and going through that, and we literally the way that we're able to ascertain the scores is we have people go 1 or 2 or 0, and then they kind of back up and describe it. So I think if I remember right, Silverton Middle, this took us about 3 hours, if I remember right, to go through these 40.
And there was a pretty good turnout for that. Do you remember, Jackie? There was a lot.
Yeah, I don't remember the number. I remember us going over and we also, I think I lean to, we're doing okay. It'll be okay. You know, I've got it. I've got this handled. And, you know, really I don't, but I like to think I do. And so you do have that wanting to please a little bit. And at least in my teaching as an elementary school teacher, moved to middle school. So that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, so we prefer bigger crowds, and it's amazing that because they're a good unit of teachers, especially at the elementary school level, they're a great unit of teachers, and they kind of go back and forth, and then they reach a consensus score, and then they move to the next one. It's very encouraging that these solid staffs really work well together, and they give us, we think, a legitimate assessment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So we already talked about some of those observations and feedback. So kind of going back a little bit, piggybacking on our initial talk tonight, one of the first things that we did in that third meeting was we had, pre-lockdown small groups and activities to talk about that site specifically. And if you remember right, we kind of went through a little bit of an emoji exercise to get an understanding of, how after touring, what we thought about those different, the site in general. And there was a lot of parallels, I think, that we saw. You could see here, I mean, just if you're not aware, I'm sure many of you are, if not everybody, just like every building, especially high schools, which this was at one time, they've been added onto over many years, and that's just, we see it virtually every high school. You see that at. There's remodels and additions and differing levels of quality when it comes to construction and integration of systems and things like that. What I thought was funny about this first group was this smiley face was more of an irony. They're just kind of, if they didn't laugh about the situation, they'd cry, kind of thing. But there was some pretty good feedback here in general, and these were much broader than the detail that we just looked at. So I won't go into a whole lot of detail here, but you can see people were pretty happy about the track and field over there, which again, being an old high school and then currently being used for the high school there. And I know a lot of you participated in this activity, but it really helped kind of frame our perspective on some of the challenges that you have there. I know that we're always trying to kind of get to a solution really quickly, but it takes a lot of iterations to do it authentically and to do it well, to fully understand the complex challenges that lie ahead. And I think with that being said, maybe what we can do here is just take a look at some just kind of general thoughts here as it relates to the middle school itself. And think about, you know, in a long range facility plan, I I don't know in this group and in the community, from your perspective, what is the thought as it relates to the middle school? That is, I mean, is it pretty well understood that this is something that needs to be addressed in the community? I mean, am I just preaching to the choir, or any thoughts there before we kind of jump into this a little bit?
I guess I'll go. I mean, oh wait, Melissa's speaking? Oh, there she is. Go ahead, Melissa.
I was just going to say that I'm not sure that in the community that it's widely known outside of people that actually have children that attend the middle school that we need to address it. But I think within this committee, everyone that was at the tour, I think is pretty clear that we need to do something to address it.
I'd like to piggyback on what Melissa said for sure, that I think when you talk about the amount of space that's wasted essentially sitting there rotting versus the other campuses. I mean, going through what you've went through tonight, all these campuses have issues, major issues, it sounds like, that we're going to have to address, which I think is hard to even look at in a 10-year plan. But I think if you look at in a 1 to 2 to 3 year plan and what happens over the past 10 years, you have a giant space that is sitting there rotting, and you're going to end up spending money on something that is essentially no good. And I think she's right that I don't know that the other campuses outside of the people that have kids there understand just how bad or how dire that is.
Well, I think one thing it's also going to come up to, as we all know, is prioritization, and I think we can see, with all our own observations with some of the scoring that we've seen, with the metrics here in this exercise, and we all know in the community. I mean, I think a lot of people do know that this is just a kind of a bridge to a future state of a building. Historically, when we moved out of Eugene Field and did reconfiguration and moved the middle school to that building, it was always a means to another end. So I think, with prioritization, this has to be on the top of our list in terms of looking at the scores, looking what we know just by observational. Each one of us has seen it with our own eyes. And we're going to have to do that, I think, with all the facilities. We're going to have to make a pecking order, but I think we can probably all have consensus that this is up at the top of the list. But the challenge and maybe what Josh said, is getting that out there to the general public, and especially to the outlying schools, because again, I think this whole process is we're going to have to eventually sell. If we go to a bond, it's the what's in it for me strategy. So everybody's going to have to buy in that we need to really address the middle school as one of the highest priorities.
And I'd like to Tom, real quick before Tom goes. That's why I think looking at the last thing that Jonah had up with the scores, I think those scores are very misleading, because when you look at Robert Frost as a campus, and maybe Lauren can touch on this, I mean, you don't have the issues at Robert Frost as far as asbestos and rotting roofs and the panel and all that you have. But when you look at the score, the middle school almost scored better than Robert Frost. And that to me doesn't make much sense.
I'm just saying, using those as one of the metrics, right? If you look at, subjective and objective means of measuring, I think those need to be taken into account. So that's a good point, Colin.
Yeah, and that's a fair assessment. Somebody asked what's an average score, and there really isn't an average score. And this is just one piece. It's not the defining piece. You can look at your the assessment of the building conditions, which has a lot more information on the quality of the building. This is just how is that building that they have functioning. So you're absolutely right, but it does give you, we think it still is useful information and understanding where some of your educational, your teaching and learning challenges might be of which you're unaware.
Yeah, and I think to that point too, in the facility assessment piece, that really addresses at a very intricate level some of the physical conditions, and which is a really great metric. And just looking at it by comparison, and we'll present some of this at a future meeting. But if you look at some of just the cost that was developed overall district wide um, for facility needs, it was around at that time 117 million. And this was, again, this is done by BBL, wasn't done by us, but what it does show you is that out of that 117 million, there was almost 32 of that was dedicated to the middle school as needs there. If you look at Robert Frost, it was there's some needs there, but they had more like 13.6 million. So there's a pretty broad array of needs there, and this for a very effective long-range facility plan, it will incorporate the educational adequacy, the facility assessments, and all that. And then, of course, like we've already said, we'll have to prioritize and get a good handle on what can the community support, what the committee could recommend, what the school board could support. All of those things will have to be taken into consideration. But I think what I'm hearing is, for the most part, at least everybody on this committee understands the needs at the middle school and the challenges. And maybe there's people outside of the Silverton area that may not but understand it. But I guess one thing that we'll probably want to get a good handle on is, are we thinking, or are we talking about replacement? Are we talking about partial replacement? Are we talking about trying to fix some things that are there now? I think that's something that we'll want to really talk about.
Go
ahead, Tom.
So I've done a lot of exploration of this over the last year, and there is no question in my mind that the school district is aware that the middle school has tremendous needs, and everybody understands that is a priority. There is a huge amount of fear amongst the voters that they're not going to get a completed school or a decent facility unless they really have a lot of transparency about what's happening. And there's a lot of fear that from the majority of the district actually lives outside the city limits, that they're going to be pushed into, if a new middle school is built, the rural kids are going to get pushed into a city school. And I think kind of looking at this from both the city and the rural perspective is really important. I don't know that anyone has a specific plan for what is going to be built. They're trying to get a sense of really what about the old middle school, what parts of that building are actually worth keeping and what parts are needing to be dispensed with. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And then how to come up with a plan that's going to fulfill the needs of the district overall in the next 50 years.
Yeah.
I have a concern, about this as well. The original question was, do they understand the need for a middle school? Well, I think, yeah. I mean, granted, if you're not there, you don't know. And we've been on site and we definitely see how bad it is. I'm on the fence whether to rip it all down or try to rebuild it like North Salem High School did. But my concern is that I've seen the direction of this committee going to just middle school. Like almost 80% of our focus is on the middle school. When I see a lot of other schools, particular teachers who are at Mark Twain right now, who that's just not a good setup. And there is spatial concerns. And I don't know if we're addressing our spatial concerns. We're forward thinking enough with COVID, how that's going to change enrollment. Is enrollment going to go down? What classroom looks like down the road? And I would like to have, okay, within 5 years, middle school, 10 years doing this, 15 years, we have to have this problem fixed, kind of written down as a goal and a timeline. Because I think that we're on like what, version 3 or 4 of this committee at this point. And I would like to see something written down where everybody's concerns are getting addressed, not just the main focus being the middle school, but people know that it needs to be done, but it might make them more at ease, knowing that we also know that the other schools need attention to.
I agree that, I mean, as an outlier parent, I would say that there's either a view that if you upgrade my middle school in town, expecting us to send our kids there, or also the idea that if the kids in town get a really nice middle school and then we're left with, you know, what we're working with currently, doesn't sound fair. So, you know, I think that you're going to really have to work on how you communicate with the public.
Well,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
to me, I was looking at Jonah's timeline earlier of where we're pitching in the next 3 months to come up with a 10-year plan in 3 months. And that to me makes my head spin, because look at the amount of campuses that we have. And I think in 3 months time to come up with a 10-year plan for each one of those campuses is crazy. And I think Eliza, you're 100% correct. I mean, we need to look at, and I would consider this committee need to continue on past just the 3 months and come up with a 10, 15, 20, 30-year plan, because we're not going to stop growing and the city's going to keep expanding. I mean, it's going to happen. And so we need to have a plan for every single campus down the road so that people know at each campus what they're looking forward to. Now, I also don't think you can ever take off the table any promise of never moving kids anywhere or boundary changes, because you're always going to have to look at that as a district. And they're going through that. We have a separate committee going through that right now. And that needs to be on the table at all points. You can never say, we're not going to close this, we're not going to move this, we're not going to do that. You have to be willing to adapt as things go on. And I think that's what everybody wants to hear, is that there's nothing's going to change at certain spots. And I don't think you can do that. It's not responsible to do that.
I would agree that 3-month timeline is pretty short. It seems to me that the driver for this whole activity is the educational program until that has pretty well decided what, if there is an optimum, what it should be. The in town is changing now to K-5. There's been a lot of talk over the years about a middle school for the entire district. There's lots of advantages to that. There's probably some disadvantages. I think all these issues, education-wise, curriculum-wise, are a tremendous driver for the facilities. And then you've got to do them both together. And I think the voters, most voters in the district, are not aware of how bad the middle school in town is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and I think
nor any of the facilities really. I mean, you know, you guys just showed us a lot of really obvious problems with a lot of schools. And I mean, part of why I was saying Mark Twain has a lot of property is like, maybe you should be looking at putting a new facility there. You know, it would have to be at the bottom of the hill. But I'm just saying there's property that this school district has. And I agree that it needs to be probably a longer term plan. And I think that COVID really interrupted this particular timeline that we've been working with here. But the way our community is behaving right now, I think it would be rather difficult to pass a bond in a year of any size. And especially a big one that would cover all the needs, and probably not a small one that would only cover part of the needs.
One of the things about the space for building all the city schools have large campus spaces. They're all over 10 acres. Robert Frost, Mark Twain Middle School, the high school. They're big spaces. Looking at the spaces around at least the west side schools, none of those campuses are over 4 acres, and most of them are less than 2 acres. And 2 of the west side schools, rural schools, are really kind of in dire need of replacement. The facilities are a hodgepodge, and they have multiple issues. I am kind of thinking that if the folks that have kids going to rural schools and feel very strongly about their communities had an option for an improved quality of facility that would be central to them and address some of the things that they are concerned about, I have the impression that we might actually be able to accomplish multiple solutions with a couple good-sized construction projects and get funding for it, as long as everybody, the people, that would, if we got 2 new facilities built, one that would be rural and one that would provide a middle school for the city, we could have structures that might last for the next 100 years, and it would really take a lot of pressure off the district.
So Tom, just to clarify your statement there, you suggesting maybe like consolidating some of the 1 or 2 or 3 of the rural schools, like you said, specifically on the west side, that would, and then building a new facility there somewhere in the same vicinity with all 3 of those or 2 of those, and then try to see if that would be amenable. Is that what I hear you're saying?
Essentially, yeah. I look at the district map, and you know, Evergreen and Central Howell are in deep need. They have multiple severe structural problems. There's no question that trying to make those structures really serviceable for the long run would cost more than building new structures. And honestly, you have a combination of busing issues, special needs issues for Title IX and whatnot. I almost wonder if we were to consider consolidating, I know this is sort of a radical idea, but he included Victor Point, Prattam, Central Howell, and Evergreen, and perhaps locate it down where maybe Dorfler Road crosses Cascade Highway or something like that. That would be fairly central to those areas, and you could have consolidate a lot of administrative and busing expenses and purchase a piece of ground, say 20 acres or more, and have maybe an ag program and really make it something that would be appealing to those people and make it an awesome facility.
I want to talk about, hold on just a second. I have talked to people out in their community, and I've asked them that question. And I wasn't including Victor Point. It was going to be combining Central Howell, now the idea. And no, just bringing this up and that this is recorded, expect comments. But Central Howell's got a problem with that intersection and safety. Okay. Prattam, I know this had a lot of money thrown into them recently. But if you find a centralized location even for those schools and add more of the CTE programs, welding, shop classes, 4-H classes, cooking class, robotics, something that would make sense for people who live in that community who are really into maybe a lot of the welding and some of the auto stuff. It could work. Like Tom's saying, it makes sense, and you combine buildings that could last for 100 years. And yeah, I got a lot of thoughts. I'll just keep it there.
Yeah, no, I'll speak up as an Evergreen parent, right? You know, I think for many years, you know, we as a community, it's been, you know, I'll go back to even like when my kids first started going there in the mid 2000s, there was talk about closures of some of the outlying schools, and Evergreen was on one of them. And, you know, we protested as a community to you know, keep things going because of our quality of academics, our parental and family involvement, and that whole deal. But again, that was 13, 14 years ago. Fast forward now, we have to be forward thinking, and I as a parent, it's hard to talk about closing potentially or consolidating a school, but I think at this point we have to look at all options. We can't be so closed-minded that we could say we can never do this. I think it's definitely something, to Tom's point, you kind of look at that and say this is a good area to maybe look at consolidation, because again, I think what we see up on the screen, you have 3 schools that are within close proximity. My opinion, Victor Point's still kind of out on its own, so I think that might be a little harder sell. But if you somehow, again, talking with the communities first, to tease the idea out there and just say, look, let's talk about this reality. Could we build something in the middle there that would be able to be much more forward thinking and get everybody a better facility for their kids? So again, as a parent, it's hard to say that, but because there's an emotional tie to the building, but I will say we have to look at all options and they have to be discussed at this point.
Aaron, I appreciate hearing you say that. Thank you. I mean, as an Evergreen parent and also as a community member that has a lot of voice. I also just wanted to say that I have been paying attention to the school board meetings for 3.5 years now, and I've seen financial reports, and I have a better understanding about how much money goes into the maintenance from our general education fund. And I think that the more that we can talk to our community about how much the cost of maintaining all this deferred maintenance is versus putting that money into a newer building with some kind of manageable maintenance plan, that might be a way of helping to help the community understand some of the adjustments that need to be made or why.
I think I'm going to go back to one other thing that somebody brought up about, I can't remember if it was Tom or some of the other folks, is, getting the word out. And I think we have to have part of our job in this community is not only getting a plan in place, but really hitting that message home. And Scott, I think we can rely, heavily upon you and the administrative team and our principals and our administration. Because I think as a team here, as a committee, we're going to have to develop the communication plan. And pardon my saying about this, but this is the best thing. We're going to have to hit people proverbially over the head with the amount of information that could go on in this plan and what we're trying to do over the next 10 years. It is going to have to be to the point where people are like, oh man, I'm getting another parent score update about this and I'm kind of sick of it, right? Then if that's the case, then we've done a good job. We're going to have to over communicate this. So I think part of our strategy has to be developing that communication plan, working with our administrative partners on that. That's going to be key as well.
So it's good to hear all this feedback, and just that I'm just more about listening at this point, just to hear from your guys' perspective. But Aaron, just in your one voice out of those 3 schools, and one important voice there, how would you feel? And I'm just asking because I don't know. If those 3 schools, what would the student population, as an example, what would that population be? It would be a larger school, or a little larger, right? And is that I think part of what I'm hearing about from the rural schools, they like some sense of autonomy, right? And they like having their own identity. Let me just ask the question outright. Is that a fatal flaw to even push an idea like that?
Let me answer part of that question. I've just been looking at the enrollments of the different schools, and Prattam, Evergreen, and Central Howell combined have approximately 300 students. If you were to try to roll in Victor Point, it has another 220 students, I believe. Constructurally, both Prattam and Victor Point are in very good condition as far as the district buildings go, realistically.
I'd like to add, I think you're onto something there, Tom. I think Aaron's right. I think I think where you look at it, when you're looking at the map that Jonah has up, to me, I think maybe part of the 10-year plan is to just look at the idea of combining those three or down the road. The one thing I will say, and I think somebody brought it up, and I think what you need to do is look at, and this is what I think our committee needs to be doing. I mean, for example, 2 years ago, the property down next to the baseball field went up for sale. We're completely surrounding it as a district, and we weren't prepared to buy it. You know, buying that property there would have added to the already, you know, landlocked area we have, parking for the baseball field, parking for all that facility, all that. That to me is something that as a committee we plan looking forward to and say, hey, if this ever comes for sale, it'd be nice to be able to buy that property and add to what we have right there instead of, you know. So one of the things is you look at all three of those campuses and maybe we start talking to the people that own around it and say, hey, would you be willing to sell 20 acres? Is there even a way to rezone 20 acres to do that? And the one challenge I think with Central Howell is Silverton Road is probably going to expand and that intersection is going to become busier. We're talking about highways. We're talking about Butte Creek. Is there room near Prattham? Is there room near Evergreen? I don't know. But to me, those three schools in a 10-year plan as an opportunity to research is part of your 10-year plan. Is that, you know, does that work? Victor Point to me geographically is so far out there for some of those kids on the southeast side. That's a long trek in. To me, when you're looking at Silvercrest, Victor Point, they kind of stand alone. Scotts Mills, Butte Creek probably do, but maybe there's even a chance someday to buy a piece of property, you combine those or expand that to be, you know, more middle school based at Butte Creek or, you know, something. I mean, like I said, all options are on the table. I definitely agree that those three, I kind of call them the Howell Prairie schools. And those three Howell Prairie schools are definitely something where I think that's a possibility to look at for the next 10 years.
I have a question real quick. Wally, are you there? I'd be curious what Wally would think about that community in that area. Get his opinion on this.
Yeah, I'm here. I can tell you that somebody had mentioned about the small schools and wanting to keep the autonomy. I think that's very much alive and well. I think there'd be a lot of pushback on trying to do that.
Yeah, you know, again, speaking from a parent and going back to what Jonah had asked initially, you know, and do we even broach the subject, right? Again, as a parent, I would say you at this point, you kind of got to, you have to talk about it. Nobody wants to. It's the white elephant in the room because we want to keep our autonomy. We want to do our thing, but we're going to have to talk about it at some point. Because I'll give you a case in point, like Evergreen. It's going to be very tough with the way funding is to ever get a gym built at Evergreen. I think the facility is, you know, there's just not enough space. I mean, if we did, we would, you know, push into the field that we use for sports there. And it's a lacking thing. We don't have a gym, right? Kind of just flown under the radar and done our thing and never really complained about it. But let me tell you, middle of February, January, it's terrible, right? You know, you can get wet in there. It can get cold. Kids have slipped. Kids have run into things. Kids have hit their heads. I mean, there's a lot of liability there, right? So I'm saying as a parent, you know, the hard part would be like, okay, we're not going to probably build something there. But if there was somewhere as a parent where I would see that vision for something as a future forward thinking facility that would combine, that would allow my kids to have, you know, a better gym facility, maybe some other, you know, ag or shop type classes, having a cafeteria, that might be something I want to look into. Because again, things have changed, you know.
Aaron, I hear you, but historically, I can tell you that when it comes down to values, they value their own little school more than they do a bunch of stuff.
I agree.
Wally,
I agree.
But Wally, wouldn't you say that those three schools have similar values?
I do, yeah.
I mean, you're essentially combining the three similar values just into a larger school. Do you think by doing that, they're not going to like the idea? I mean, is it just going to be the size of the facility and the campus and the classrooms that they're not going to like, but yet you're going to share the common values?
They do. I totally agree with that, but I think there'd be pushback because of the size of school. They'd lose their little country school. Sure. And kind of on the flip side, though, I want to tell you that I think we did the last long-range task force in 2013, And I believe this was on that plan to do something similar to what you're talking about.
So Wally,
Let me,
actually, I can address that specific point. I actually spoke to people that were on the 2013 task force and it was never brought up. I actually want to get Wally's opinion about his own perspective. If he were in the situation where having kids going to school, and he had this opportunity to have his kid have a school that had modern facilities, but spoke to the kind of the values that were in the neighborhood, what was your personal reaction to that itself?
It's a great question. I think personally, I would like to just keep it low key and keep the small school. That'd be a higher priority for me. It's close relationship with your neighbors, close relationship with your kids, and that's a really high priority.
Can I chip in? I mean, I went to Evergreen, so I have a favoritism there, but and that is important, the community school. On the other hand, I'm continue to think about the educational side, and I taught freshman science at the high school for 15 years. And I'm not saying that some of the rural students did never catch up, but it was obvious with those freshman students in science class, those students who came from a facility, and there were only two, Butte Creek and the Silverton schools, where there was indeed a specific science specialist in the 7th and or 8th grade. Those kids were much better prepared, generally speaking, to take high school science than, and I'm not criticizing Evergreen, but then kids from, I'll just pick on Evergreen. So there is a very important part of this discussion is the educational component. And Aaron mentioned the gym, that's part of that. The other one is music facilities. And and the big picture, of course, is equity. That's an issue that the school district is wrestling with. And so you're not going to have what I would call total equity in a bunch of small rural schools. And I know there's lots of good things about small rural schools. The other point I would just mention in terms of publication, communication with the public, new folks to the area would tend to say, well, what's the school board doing that they let all these little schools end up in such a hodgepodge of additions and poor repair and all that sort of thing, especially the hodgepodge of additions. And you have to remember that until prior to unification, whenever that was, 97, 98, all of the additions and so on to these small rural schools was done when those schools were separate districts. The Silverton Union High School Board had no say at all about the educational program or the facilities prior to unification. Thank you.
Well, Ray, I don't know, can't remember when the last year you taught at the high school. I will say that, again, I'll speak up for Evergreen because it was brought up is, I think that a lot of the kids going out of Evergreen have done pretty well in science. And again, maybe that's a change in curriculum. Maybe it's a change in focus due to some of the lacking that some teachers like yourself gave feedback to. I don't know, but I think they've done fairly well as of recent. Again, my scope of time at Evergreen only goes back to roughly 2006. So that my things may have changed. I want to kind of, I don't want to dominate on talking about Evergreen here, but I just want to go on record and saying here too, like I'm in no way suggesting we close all three of those schools down and build something big mega thing. That's not what I'm saying. However, I think it would be naive of us to at least not have the conversation potentially with these communities and having them helping spell and understand the changing need for education, for equity, for facilities, for everything that it fits into the big picture now, that even more than it did 15, 20 years ago. Again, not saying we close any of these schools down. I'm saying we have to, though, have a conversation, and those are hard conversations to have. They're uncomfortable, and you might get tarred and feathered for it. But I guess as a parent out there at Evergreen, I'd be the first to sign up for it, because I think it's a hard conversation to have, but it's needed to be had. So
Aaron,
I'm not trying to put Evergreen down. What I'm trying to say is the rural schools that did not have a science specialist were not as well prepared for high school science as those students that came from the schools that did have a science specialist. That's the point I'm trying to make.
and so Aaron and Wally, just another question as we're, kind of talking this through, not wanting to give up the smaller campus style. What if you had those 3 campuses into 2 and you went where one was maybe, I don't know, K4, K5, the other one was 6, 7, 8. So you still had, the community, the common, I'm lacking the word, but the beliefs of the community out there, but yet you had a middle school style campus and a younger age. Would that not work, or is it that they want truly to stay in the K8?
I think it depends who you talk to. I think might be a split on that.
Like 50-50, maybe, you think?
Yeah.
That might be another option to look at.
Yeah, and I think so I'm going to move this conversation along a little bit, just because we've gone beyond our our allotted time, and we can pick back up on the middle school portion if we want to later, or we can kind of look at it now. I think at the end of the day, a good long-range facility plan takes it takes a lot of iterations, a lot of work, a lot of, just because you explore something doesn't necessarily make that what's going to happen or exclude something else. I think that we all agree that the middle school is something that will have to be taken into consideration. So, and I think that's one of the bigger priorities. So I guess I want to maybe take the temperature in the room at the moment and see, do we want to look at that at a different time because we kind of changed a little bit on the agenda, just because I know that this is a very passionate piece, and understandably so. But we're agile and adaptable, but we need to start looking at kind of solutions and thoughts and get reactions, I think, to move forward.
So I've actually been doing a little bit of work on the middle school. One of the things that struck me after I walked through it, I consider the West Wing, which has been built in 4 constructions, none of them really cohesive. I feel like that's just a section that needs to be gotten rid of. The original high school building, well, actually, maybe back up. The gym has had a lot of work done to it. It's been seismically upgraded, even though the list of upgrades it needs, based on what BB&L did in 2019, amounted to millions. 10 million sticks in my head. I feel like Lauren has accomplished a lot of what needs to be done to that structure, and by most reference points is probably a structure worth saving, and it has 28,000 square feet. Typically a middle school has about 150 square feet per student. The old section of the building has 44,000 square feet. Its limitations, besides needing to be gutted, are the classrooms are a little bit fixed in their size. The hallway, the classrooms, at least on the Schlater Street side, are limited to 22 feet in width. And then the addition to the west is in multiple lifts. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. But structurally, it has a lot of potential space. It's 44,000 square feet, and I don't know whether it's worth salvaging, but I think exploring what its salvage value would be for savings is probably worth taking spending a little bit of money or time investing in before deciding just to demolish it. The West Wing is, I don't know, it's a funny mix.
Yeah, I think the West Wing.
I mean, the East Wing is a funny mix. I mean, excuse me, I apologize.
Yeah, definitely the East Wing is a funny mix. I think there's also a level too where you want to take into consideration, you know, are those items, you know, if you maintain a portion because it's salvageable, is that compromising the overall master plan? And it's just something to take into consideration and think about as we move forward. I think instead of going into maybe some planning kind of exercises here, because I don't think we're there yet. I just don't. I'm not feeling that from the group here. I'm just going to ask the question, and maybe this is just a dumb question, and I shouldn't be asking this, but what is the general feel of the historic building? And when I say historic, I mean the 39 building. Has a lot of the community gone to that school when it was the high school? You know, because I think anything we do here, that has to be the first question, don't you think?
Yes.
Needs to go.
Well, in terms of review, structurally, my understanding is that it was not, you know, in terms of seismic quality and just codes and foundation, it was not built to where we needed to be, right? So that makes the whole building bad. Am I correct in that?
Well, I've just actually been talking with architects and a little bit of structural people about that. And it's not as bad as one would anticipate. The foundations are kind of curious, but long story short, it is not actually going to be, would not be prohibitively expensive to reinforce it and make it structurally sound for modern earthquake codes.
Mm-hmm.
The question I
Lauren,
think, go ahead, sorry, Tom.
Actually, and I'm sure Lauren has some thoughts about this.
Real quick, just for me, like, so I get out of the way. Obviously, if you can keep something historic, it's great. But what it's going to come down to the taxpayers is what's going to be the most cost-effective way to spend their tax dollars. That's going to last the longest, so we don't have this conversation about this building in even 50 years. So that's my say. And I did go there. I graduated 2002. It was tough to walk through that building and kind of see the state that it's in. And I had a lot of questions of how it ended up that way. But yeah, I think for me, the most important thing is what's going to be best for the community. And that's to spend their dollars as wisely as possible.
Just to kind of give you an example, I'm going to use the Butte Creek cafeteria as an example that we did a seismic retrofit on, okay? And we had no choice but to leave the walls up on that building and retrofit it because it was a grant and you have to fix the existing building. It would have been far cheaper for us to tear that down and put up a new structure that would have, you know, then been complete and all fully functional with all new finishes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be surprised if we could retrofit that building that's been sitting and you know, I mean, it's got some structural issues beyond a shadow of a doubt. It was leaking for quite a while before I got here. And I know that there's issues with the structure in there and seismic safety.
And I know that that building has big hallways right now, but I can tell you that Butte Creek hallway around that cafeteria, and the entrance that goes between the front of the building and into the cafeteria is drastically reduced. I mean, it's much smaller.
Yeah.
Just because of what they had to add to the walls.
We basically put all new walls on the inside. And that was what it took to make it structurally sound. So you lost basically 10 inches all the way around inside.
Yeah. I would like to offer up the notion that both avenues could be investigated by this team. And it sounds like there's such, there's nobody knows. So I think if there's one approach we could do is to answer that question. Let's pursue both of those options because there may be somebody in the middle ground. We've done both. We've done Washington Elementary School in Tacoma. We retrofitted that one. We just finished the design of Gresham High School. They tore down 80% of it and salvaged the historic pieces. So we can do both. And in that case, they did see a savings like at Gresham, a $3.5 million swing just on the seismic upgrade. I'm not saying that's the same. What I am offering is let us do that investigation of which way. Let's be the ones that really give you some hard and cold facts and take out the speculation.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
A good option. So. Look at all options. I think that everything needs to be on the table considered.
Yeah. So I think
we have to, because when people are going to ask us like the Eugene Field thing, and you have all these bad rumors, you have to say it's going to cost this amount of dollars to knock it down and build it, or it's going to cost this much to retrofit it. And the decision was based on the dollars. And I think we owe that to the taxpayers to come up with a defined number.
So one of the other things. The last time we tried to do a bond, they didn't want to necessarily come up with a set amount of dollars and plans. They just wanted to throw out the number to go for before they did that, because they didn't want to spend the money to, come up with quote unquote a blueprint and all that to say, this is what we want to build. So my question to this group is, would that be better this time? I mean, do you have the money to spend that to say, here is the quote unquote blueprint with a bid, this is what we're going for?
Well, we're spending money on this facilitation already. We have a goal for a long-range facility plan. I mean, I think that ultimately it has to be a plan that can move forward and not another one that falls flat. And I think it would make sense right now to charge BLRB with the goal of figuring out how to make the middle school a healthy school, either a new building and what that would cost, or one to make it with a greater centralized space that moves better for the students and allows for cafeteria use for every student because it meets occupancy, things like that.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And there might be another thing too here in the mix that we need to consider. And again, if we're going to explore all options, is this the best location for the middle school? And that's something that I know we talked about in the past. You've got James Street, which is tight, the access on Schlater, coming in off of Brown Street, going out and the exit plan, in the morning. Is this the best facility or best site that we can build a school? Do we need to look at other properties? I think that could also be considered.
Could that be including look at all three of your in-town schools as potential properties for your middle school? Or, reshuffling all three of those campuses to better meet the needs? Or are you talking about purchasing more land?
I think we got to look at what we own now. The one that comes up, and I don't know if it would work, is the one, I think, over by Robert Frost. We own more property down below. And, I know that there's a west side development, plan for the city of Silverton in the future, that is going to build down around that. Is that a good location to put a middle school in, that where you could almost have some kind of shared land use between that and Robert Frost? I don't know. That's just one property.
Access, and I believe they have 29 acres there at Robert Frost. So.
And it's a much better way to come in up there on was it Westfield than coming in on James Street. So I think we need to, Eliza, I'm with you. I think we need to look at all options.
So just
Yeah.
just to comment real quick on that, when we went around the last bond, when Irv, or Irv's on the school board, I talked to Irv about that. One comment that Irv made is, working for K&E and having the experience in that in the years of excavation, is that you already have the streets, the sewer, the water at Schlater, where when you're talking about Robert Frost, you're talking about a sloped field, a sloped structure. You're gonna have to move a lot of dirt. You're gonna have to bring in a lot of utilities. You already have that at Schlater Street. I mean, you essentially have all that in there. Now, traffic and everything is not necessarily ideal, but it's there. You already have the streets and all that. So that's one thing he said when we went around the last bond, is he said it makes so much more sense to do it right where you already are, because it's all right there already. And the football field, baseball field, like all that stuff's already there and already established.
Yeah, and I think one thing I want to share with you guys, just to kind of get you to think a little bit about this as well. We won't go into trying to lay this out, but I will kind of share what a grade level grouping for your program, what the scale might be, based on just current square footages and kind of what the needs are there. This is essentially a one-story classroom pod. So what I'd like to impress upon you as we get ready to convene here is, when if you are building this with students in mind, obviously, because they've got to go to school, there's no swing school for the middle school students, right? So you're looking at, if you're doing one-story solution as an example, you're wanting to keep these classrooms going. You're going to want to keep these classrooms going. You're going to want to keep the portables going. So there's very little options outside of a complete reorganization of the site, which may or may not impact the baseball field, the football field, the district office, or any of that. That's a single story solution. So if this was the solution, then you're probably gonna want to build these in a phased development, right? So you're gonna have your classroom buildings kind of being built while maybe this is knocked down, but it probably isn't, because it's got all the utilities going through. Now, if you go to a two-story solution, it does open up some possibilities. Now, you'll notice that we've already said the gym's in pretty good condition, so that's already saying we're taking out the gym, which again, probably not the right solution, but this just kind of gives you a sense of scale, relative scale. And we're not proposing this, any of these ideas just yet, just because we want. That's really what today was about, was just to get a sense of scale. So, putting a new gym as an example may take out the portables, but these classrooms may be in place. So there is that to consider, and we'll want to look at that as we look at doing a middle school. If we look at a middle school replacement on the site, which I'm hearing from the committee, that's what we want to look at, is two options: that and repurposing that middle portion. Those are things that we have to think about as planners, and moving forward, because we got to keep the kids in school, right?
So Jonah, let me ask you, you guys that have done this many times, in your opinion, do you look at this site and if you go north up James Street, you've got a very big green space up by the bus barns that's got essentially nothing in it except field space. So in your experience of you guys doing this before, what do you think is the best alternative? Well, knee jerk looking at it right now.
I mean, ideally, it's always better to build on a field and swap the schools. That's a typical model that you see, but that you can't always do that. So are you talking about this, Colin, this space over here? Or are you talking further north?
Further north.
Okay.
On the
We'd have to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, up to the north of that is all essentially all green space
Mhm.
that is just athletic fields. And you know, that was the question, is if you do something there, there's a whole new 2-story campus that you do while the other one is getting used. Then you repurpose the other part down by the football field later after that's done.
Yeah, those are good strategies. And we were talking about the savings of redeveloping Schrader. The city is going to require, and Jason can vouch for this, if we put a new school on that same site or renovate that site, the city is still probably going to require that we upgrade the infrastructure around the school up to current code. So where I'm going with this is we should look at both of these. Going to another site completely, yeah, you're going to have some of those development costs. You're going to have half-street improvements, and you're going to have to move there's still some of those costs in either location. So I think a good analysis in either way. I can also tell you that anybody and I'm sorry, we're just finishing up. Gresham High School was 250,000 square feet, and they kept 2,000 students on site for the entire duration. So it can be done. And the way they did it is they tore down some programs that relocated temporarily. It was music and drama and auto tech, and they relocated those programs, and they built a 3-story tower on that area. And then that was in 1 year. The next year, they moved all the students into that 3-story tower and took the rest of it down. And they salvaged a gymnasium, by the way, Tom. It was a 2003 gymnasium. So I don't want us to think it can't be done and throw any of it out. What I think is the issue is let's figure out the big plan. We got to figure out this. We spent 45 minutes talking about the big plan. And until we have that, we can't really drill down on the small plans. So I want to come up with a strategy for this team that addresses all of your concerns about the entire school district.
Yeah.
Because I didn't hear a consensus. I didn't hear a solution. I heard somebody. So I think we've got a lot more work. What I think we can do, one last thing, Jonah, one thing we should do is exactly what Jonah's showing you, is kind of show you, let's talk about those scenarios so that you can put that in your hip pocket and say, yeah, we got a plan for the middle school, but we really want to talk to you about these out of town schools.
While we're talking about a big plan, Brett mentioned a couple times about having to share space with the high school. Should we be talking about moving the high school activities to the high school campus, or expanding the high school campus and keeping the middle school?
I was thinking about that.
Let's put it on the table. It's your process.
Good point. Just because the high school is new and really nice, or newer, I mean, let's be honest, that first part of the building is 23 years old, right? Or 22 years old. You know, that's becoming an aging building, right? So we have to continue on that. Let's not get stuck like we've been now and not having good retrofit plans in place. So yeah, we're going to even have to think about the high school and how we're going to expand that in the future too.
Yeah.
I think one of the recent things that came up, and again, I know we're trying to finish, but an example of that is the track. So we can no longer have league meets, the high school can't, on our track. And so do you spend $250,000 to repair it enough to do it? Or do you spend, I don't know, $400,000 or $500,000 to build a new track over at the high school? And so those issues are starting to come up. Even like we love using the track and the football field and all of that, but it's a burden on the high school too, to come over and invade our space and, you know, have to share things and all that. So there's those things that should be considered as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one quick thing I want to propose to people, and I was looking at Salem Kaiser School District and Measure 98 and CTEs, and the pendulum swing back to the trades a little bit. And what they've done is they've created a centralized location for their CTEs. where the schools themselves don't have their individual buildings. And this helps with equity. That means everybody gets the same opportunities because they're going to the same space. Doesn't mean you have to build a separate facility at each school so that they all have it. And it's something that it'd be interesting to think at for the school district of how that could possibly look if we had a centralized location for auto shop. Because I think, Brett, you told me that you do send some of your kids to the high school to go use their spaces. I was just looking how that would look like for the K-8s and that are also in the district.
Josh, you're just talking about putting the educational program first. I like that.
Yeah. I do too.
Well spoken, Ray.
So we're 4 minutes over our time. Thought maybe I just really quickly, if anybody has any last things they want to talk about or just mention, so we can capture that, and we'll come back and adjust accordingly to the next meeting. But what I'm hearing, kind of big picture, is we want to look at a few options for the middle school site. We want to look at, and also that northern portion, and or look at maybe in town. We want to look at potential options for those Central, Howell, and Prattham and Evergreen, and what to do there. Just as a caveat there, when I look at the combined cost per the BBL study, it was about $11 million for the needs at those three schools. Just to give us kind of a ballpark, to build a new 300 plus student school is going to be more than that. So let's just keep that in mind as we talk about, because I've also heard that cost is going to be a major concern. So there's that too. So we want to look at that though as a potential option. But now we don't have property to look at and to consider, but we can maybe talk about some ideas and some thoughts there. And then I think with the middle school, whether it's the historical building, whether we retrofit that, and if you retrofitted that historic building, you could probably fit most of the program in that condemned portion. Pretty close to it anyway, outside of the gym. But that's something that we may want to look at too. We've done it, like Richard said, we've done it many which ways, from the Gresham High School model to, he referenced Washington Elementary School in Tacoma. That was a complete gut. We kept the floors, complete seismic upgrade on the interior with concrete shear walls. Similarly, when I did Stadium High School in Tacoma, about 15 years ago, that's what we did there as well. So it can be done any which way. And yeah, sometimes it's more costly, sometimes it's more cost effective. We don't really know until you dig into the details on that. But I was really trying to get more at, is there a reverence for that building? Is there, and I didn't get that sense, at least from this group, I didn't get that sense that there was,
I will
like,
say
this.
There is some reverence, but I think the community wants a really functional building when we get done. And whatever we do, that is the bottom line.
Gotcha.
I'll say this, it's not a reverence for the building, it's the reverence for the location.
Gotcha.
I think the fields that I played on my whole youth, the baseball field, the football field, the Friday night memories when we won a state championship in '91, and all these things, it's not just the building, it's that location in town that has reverence, I guess, for me.
That's interesting. That's
Gotcha.
good.
Cool.
Thanks, Joshua.
I would say the same thing, in talking to some people. I don't know that you need to keep the front brick wall of Schlater to be the original brick, but if you can design something that has a similar brick facade in the front that looks similar, do we need to keep the actual brick wall? No. If it looks similar and it's a similar front structure, but it's 2 stories all the way through, it'll work. I really think that.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Great.
I also think that this town had such a emotional fight over Eugene Field as a building that we're a little tired of that. And I think we tore that one down and was like, okay, we're done. We know how to do that. We can move on.
Okay.
Okay.
And that was going to be my question, Melissa. I'm glad you brought that up because I remember when Wally presented, some of those bond challenges, a lot of the failures were tied to Eugene Field.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked the question.
And I would
lot
like to say, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, a lot of people who are talking went to the high school. I went to the high school. It's not equal to Eugene Field for whatever reason.
Gotcha.
I don't think. And every time I give a tour of somebody who went to the building and they walk around and see what it's like now, they are vast majority of people say we got to do something different. And I know that's anecdotal, but that's the sense I get. It's not just what Melissa said. It's not like the Eugene Field thing.
Gotcha.
I will say I'm thrilled that my kids are going to high school at the new high school out there and not Schlater Street.
There you go. There you go.
And I don't think Brett or Melissa would disagree with me.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm just going to say
Great.
that the $11 million that you identify for the rural school upgrades, that's really to just get ramps and make them sort of up to grade, but it doesn't really tie them together into nice campuses.
Right.
Fair enough.
Yeah. It's a good distinction there, Tom. It's definitely not to completely rethink the educational experience. It's facilities at that point.
Yeah, that's why I'm going to use that opportunity.
Well, next steps. So we've got some homework to do before our next meeting. These are some items that we had identified before this meeting. Continue to evaluate, which are things we need to do. Evaluate the educational adequacy of the site-based committees, determine what buildings can be classified as historic by checking, and this is an ODE requirement, by checking national, state, and local registries. Having that equity discussion, developing a program at both the middle school and then program needs at the elementary school and K-8s, and then analyze needs at the high school if there are any. We did hear a little bit when we did our educational adequacy, which we'll share at the next meeting. And then December 16th, has everybody got that on their calendar for our next meeting?
Hey, Jonah, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
on the historic thing, is that something that we don't have a choice of? That if it's old enough, it can be historic, it has to be historic?
So while he's doing that, it is a requirement. It's an ORS. But no, wait a minute. So let me clarify what that means. And I can see your concern. Any school or any public building that is in excess of 50 years old has to be documented as part of the long-range facility planning process. What it means is we take pictures of the exterior of the building and document the facts about the building. That's as far as we take it. Whether you get a class or you get a designation as historic or any of that is still up to the owner of the building. So what you do have to do, and what we did do on the case of Gresham High School, like I said, they tore down the old part. They, in fact, Jonah did it. We documented the history of the school and came to a written agreement as to what we were going to salvage from the school and repurpose in a new school. And they signed the letter of intent, the letter of LOA, and off we go.
Just worried that it might limit, what we can do.
Dedicate or classification as a historic building on a register is still the owner's prerogative. It used to be that any person in the community could walk in and say, I'm filing an application to make this a historic building. That's no longer the case.
That's probably a good thing.
Hey, Tom. Hey, thanks for all your work you do, but I just want to publicly thank you. I don't know if you guys know, Tom's an ER doc and he's on the front lines right now
Wow.
during this crazy time. So
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
thanks for taking the time, buddy.
Oh, well, thank you. It's actually a pleasure. It's a gift to be able to work with a community like this.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tom.
Fred. And
Thanks,
you.
Tom.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for all of your work, you guys.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time.